Right, good morning. It's 10 o'clock and it's Friday the 10th of December, and welcome to the People and Health Scrutiny Committee meeting, which will have a single item of just discussing the budget, the forthcoming budget for 2022-23. Welcome everybody, welcome members of the public, and welcome all the officers. I've got a number of officers here this morning. I won't go through all of them, but I will introduce the ones who will be presenting as we go through the meeting. If I can start this morning's meeting by having a roll call of members so that we can establish who's here and for them to introduce themselves. My name is Jill Taylor and I'm the chair of this committee, and I'm a councillor for Westham in Weymouth. Molly Rennie, could I go past to you?
Hello, good morning everybody. I'm Molly Rennie. I'm the vice chairman of the committee, councillor for Dorchester. Nice to see everybody as you come into the meeting.
I've had a note. So the next one on my list is Piers, Councillor Brown. I've had an email from him sending his apologies. If they could be noted. Councillor Gorringe.
Good morning, everybody. It's Councillor Barry Gorringe, St Leonard's and St Ives Ward.
Good morning from that's right over on the east of the county, isn't it? Good morning, Barry.
Morning.
Councillor Ireland.
Yeah, morning. Councillor Nick Ireland, representative Crossways.
Good morning, Nick. Councillor O'Leary, I've had an apology from. Councillor Penfold.
Good morning, everyone. Mary Penfold, councillor for Yetminster Ward.
Good morning, Mary. Councillor Pipe.
Good morning, Chairman. Councillor Bill Pipe, representing Litchfield Minster, Litchfield Travers and Upton.
Good morning, Bill. And Councillor Turner, we've had an apology for. Do you know what I do think is nice about this committee is that we've got members from all over the county. So we're not just all from one area, which I think adds an awful lot to this committee. Right, if I can go.
Excuse me, Chairman, Robin Legg.
Oh, sorry. I missed Councillor Legg out. I do apologise, Robin. Are you there, Councillor Legg? I know Councillor Legg frequently has IT problems, but I am expecting him this morning.
Yeah, I've not heard anything. We'll keep an eye out for him.
Okay, if we keep an eye out, and otherwise we'll carry on. Hopefully he will attend this morning. Right, I have the standard. Councillor Legg, welcome. I take it you're having IT problems again this morning. Sorry, you're on mute. Councillor Legg has left. Okay, I'm sure he'll be back in a moment. If I can read out the standard thing that I need to read out at the start of all these meetings because they are virtual. In consultation with group leaders, the Chief Exec has exercised his delegated powers to revert to virtual informal meetings of council committees until the webcasting equipment has been installed and tested. Members were advised that where a decision was required, the appropriate corporate director would be the responsible individual to make the decision whilst considering the views expressed by the wider committee membership. As I say, we had hoped to have this as a face-to-face meeting, but we're having IT problems in the offices. And also, to be quite honest, I'm not sure it's a sensible thing to be doing at the moment. So I hope people will bear with us with our online meetings. We've had the apologies which have been noted, and I'd like to move on to declarations of interest, please. Does anybody have a declaration of interest? There is silence out there. If anybody feels they have a declaration as we go through this agenda, please will you say so, and then it can be recorded later on in the meeting. Public participation. Do we have any of the members of the public wishing to participate in this meeting? Have we got any questions come in from them, Fiona?
No, we haven't, Chairman. Nothing received.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions from members. Now, I've got one question that has come in from Councillor Rowe that I've spoken to her, and we'll take that as we go through the agenda. And so with that, we're on to item 5, which is the budget scrutiny. I'm intending to take this in the order that is in the papers. So our first, I've asked for quite short presentations. There will be presentations from Aidan Dunn. Just a second. Aidan Dunn, who, I can't remember your title, Aidan, who's the Executive Director for Corporate Development. The next presenter will be Vivian Broadhurst, who is the Interim Executive Director of People Adults. Then I will take Andrew Billany as the Corporate Director for Housing. And then I'll take Sam Crowe as the Director for Public Health. And then we will move on to Children's with Teresa Levy as the Executive Director of People Children's. So what I'd like you to do is keep your questions to the specific director who is presenting their part of the budget at the time. If I can go to Aidan to present the first part of this, please, which takes us about halfway through this paper. Aidan, would you like to start, please?
I will do, and thank you for the introduction, Chair. So to recap, I'm Aidan Dunn, the Executive Director for Corporate Development, and I've been coordinating the budget setting process. Before I start, can I just give the apologies of Councillor Gary Suttle, our portfolio holder for finance, who really wants to be here but can't be here due to a family matter. So what I want to do, I'm going to share my screen and show a short presentation because I'm very conscious that the papers we have in front of us are quite lengthy and complex. So I just want to navigate through with a quick presentation. So let me just, if I can share my screen and it's not coming up as I intended. I'll tell you what, I'll just talk us through. That's probably the easiest way. So by way of introduction, the budget setting process for 22-23 is very similar to last year in the sense that it's very complex because we're in a time of significant financial and economic uncertainty. And I think we've seen that just in the last few days with the sort of addition of additional restrictions around the latest wave of COVID, but also we're seeing as related to that services under real pressure and services in particular that we're looking at today, be it public health, be it adult care and children's services. So services under pressure at the moment and indeed for next year and beyond as well. And similarly, the thing that we crave in local government is certainty and long-term planning. But every indication is that this next year's funding will once again be a one-year settlement as opposed to the 3-year that we'd hoped for. So given that uncertainty and the financial uncertainty, what we have done in our budget setting process is taken two factors really. First of all, we're early in our budget setting process and we've tried to make it as transparent as possible. And that means that the budget is evolving over time as information becomes available, be that from government or anywhere else. So our budget setting process really, in terms of the public domain, it started in Cabinet on the 5th of October, where we published some high-level assumptions around our financial position and our financial assumptions for next year. And then on the 27th of October, the government announced the National Autumn Statement and Spending Review, which gave us an indication of the funding availability next year, but also government policy as well. And then more recently, during November, there have been some informal briefings for all members of Dorset Council, where we've looked at our existing levels of spend and also informally looked at the budget proposals as well. And now we bring this into the public domain and for your scrutiny today. That said, there is, I've mentioned the uncertainty because this time next week, well, we're expecting on the 16th of December, the local government financial settlement, which will be the actual detail of how much funding we'll get next year from government. So we are sort of slightly in the dark at the moment. So what the figures you've got in front of you are our best estimates, and the detail will follow next week. And I'll talk through the implications of that in a moment. The process we've followed for setting the budget for this year is, first of all, for next year, is starting with this year's budget. So we've looked at this year's budget. We've then explored the areas of pressure that we know we're encountering. Some of the budgets, as you know, are overspending this year, and we want to set that right for next year. So we've looked at our underlying budget pressures. We've also taken account of inflation. We're very mindful that inflation rates are high in some particular market segments at the moment, but we've also factored in demand sort of growth in various service areas as well, not so much as in adult care, the growing demand for services there. We've also adjusted for income assumptions about the funding we're going to generate through income and charging, and finally the council tax proposals and business rate assumptions as well. And all of those factors come together to create what we've described as a budget gap. And in order to close that budget gap, we've developed an efficiency and transformation programme, which totals around about £17 million for next financial year, and the details of which I'm sure you want to explore. They're in the appendices within the paper. In terms of the headline budget proposals, they're contained within the paper that you have in front of you. But in terms of funding going in today, or areas you're looking at in this particular committee, just a few factors. No, just to be clear, there aren't any slides for this. I'm just sort of navigating through the paper, Councillor Pipe. Just the headline factors are the funding increase overall. The budget increase overall is at 6.9%. That's the budget proposal, 6.9% budget increase for next year. But the largest area of anticipated budget increase is in adults and housing, and we've got a table within the paper that describes adults and housing budget increase of just over 10%, whereas children's services, the increase is looking at nearer 3.4, 3.5%. So that's the budget proposals within the papers. That said, there is still a budget gap that we're exploring, and you might want to touch upon today. So there's a budget gap of 4.5 million. So the budget proposals, we've still got a funding shortfall of 4.5 million. And our expectation of that is that when we get the final local government settlement next week, that we're expecting additional government funding of 4.5 million. Now the trouble is we haven't got the details, so we have modelled a range of between sort of just over sort of 3.5 million through to 8.5 million, and this is what government it depends on the formula that the government uses to allocate that funding. But our hope and expectation is that the £4.5 million shortfall that we have at the moment will be funded by a government grant. So all of that is against that context of risk and uncertainty that we've got at the moment, which is, will there be a further lockdown, or certainly the winter pressures, which I'm sure Vivian will talk about shortly. We've got those economic pressures around inflation, in particular, that's causing a degree of uncertainty. Government funding remains uncertain, and then we've got the challenges of delivering a £17 million efficiency and transformation programme. So all in all, we've got a budget proposal in front of you that I'm sure you want to explore, and I just draw your attention to the final line of the budget paper, the scrutiny paper, that says that if next week, when we find out that the actual allocation of funding from government, if it does require a £500,000 or more reduction in the expenditure proposals, then what we'd like to do is come back to scrutiny for you to explore that in a bit more detail, and we'd have to put in an extraordinary scrutiny committee sometime in the first week of January. Our hope and expectation is that that won't be necessary, and that we'll get the £4.5 million that we've been indicated, but we'd just like to sort of leave that as a caveat. So that sort of describes the context and hopefully helps you navigate through the papers from a financial context, and opens the door that way for you to explore the service implications. So Chair, at that point, if I could hand back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aidan. That's a really useful presentation of the first part of the meeting. Can I go to any members who are not on this committee for questions first of all? And then I'll take committee members. I've got no RTSs in the... Oh, I have now got an RTS. Councillor Gray, would you like to come in, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Right, Aidan, yes, thank you. Can we go to page 9 for the assumptions? It's just easier for me to look on the screen. I've got some questions about the assumptions. Yes, there we go. Aidan, can you just talk a little bit about, I'm interested in first of all, the inflationary number at 2%, given that almost every single government agency and pretty much everybody else in the country thinks it's 4.2 at the moment. It's probably going to end up at 3.5, I guess, at the end of the year. Why we've assumptive at 2% for inflation? Because obviously that's it's gone down from 2.5 to 2. So I'm interested in the thinking. I realise that there's budgetary inflationary pressures on the services that we might procure, but given the NI increases that some of our suppliers will be pushing our way, why have we moved it down?
Okay, thank you. That's a really good and helpful question. Thanks for the opportunity to explain that. So I quite agree with you that the sort of in terms of the basket of inflation, it's indicating sort of 4.5% at a national level, and we recognise that many of our suppliers will be encountering that level of inflation. And I think one of the things about Dorset Council, as with any local government organisation, we're probably about half of our expenditure is with external suppliers, but we buy a whole range of different things. So inflation is running at inflation in the care sector is running a bit higher than that, and we've actually allocated within the adult care budget more than that level of inflation, more than the 2%. But also, for example, in the waste sector, price inflation isn't so high at the moment. So what the figure that we've got there is an average. So that's the first point. But secondly, and most importantly, is there's a distinction between what the providers are encountering as inflation pressures versus how much we as an organisation are prepared to and able to fund that inflation. So crudely, if a supplier is experiencing a 4% inflation factor, what we'd be looking to do is actually we're prepared or able to fund maybe 2% of that, and the supplier would have to absorb a 2% efficiency themselves. Now, that gets slightly more complex in that some of our contracts are longer term and have got a price, an inflation factor built in, say it'll be at sort of consumer price index or similar. So clearly we'll honour contractual inflation clauses, but some of our contracts are negotiated on an annual basis, and we'll be having conversations with our suppliers that go along the lines of, what is it that we can do when we're working with you to help suppress some of those inflation pressures? Now, that's a strategy, that's an approach that we've adopted this current financial year, and it has worked successfully from our perspective, and is an approach we intend to use next year. So this is part of our commercially minded approach to recognise that suppliers are experiencing inflation, but also recognising that they need to improve their efficiency as much as we need to improve our efficiency. So the inflation of 2% is how much we're prepared to pay, not how much the market is experiencing.
Okay, thank you. Chair, can I continue? I've got a couple more questions. Is that okay? I don't mean to hold.
Yes, yeah, please continue, Councillor Gray.
Okay, same question, Aidan, but really on the increases in fees and charges at 2.5. Why 2.5 and not 3 or 3.5, given that the rate of inflation is likely to rise? And if we only increase it by 2.5, of course, it will be going backwards in terms of what we charge the customer, or the take will be going backwards.
Yeah, thank you. So 2.5 once again is an average, and in terms of fees and charges, that ranges from car parking through to the amount that we charge for contributions to care, that kind of factor. So once again, this is an average, and we'll have seen in recent weeks going through Cabinet the proposed car parking charges increase, which do exceed this level of inflation, and those the income anticipated from that is actually built into the place budgets already. So 2.5% is kind of like a catch-all average across the board that we model, but there is local sensitivity depending on the particular area of charging and what we can do within legislation and what we can do within sort of market, sort of what the market's prepared to take, as it were. So that's a catch-all average at this point.
Brilliant. Okay, last question for me. Given that the government looks set to continue the business rate reductions for retail, does the 0.5 business rate growth, does that take into account that our take? Well, first question is, will our take be less on the business rates because the government is discounting retail trade from business rates in large proportions? Do we take less, and why is there a 0.5 growth? Is that more businesses or more take from existing businesses, I guess?
Can I invite Jim McManus to come in and comment on that one, because it's quite a complex area. Jim, are you able to join us?
It is.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aidan. Morning, members. Councillor Gray, thanks for your question. In terms of business rates relief, generally what government does is if it means if it does something in terms of relieving business rates, it will compensate local authorities 100% for that. So I suppose with an accountant's hat on, our ideal scenario would be that government compensated us 100% for all of those business rates. We would then never have any issues with people defaulting or going out of business for business rates payments. So there's actually much more security for us as long as government honours its pledge to provide grant support through Section 31 to local authorities. It's actually more certain for us.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Aidan. I'll save the rest of my questions for later. I'll let somebody else have a go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gray. Could I now go to Councillor Andrews, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask a question on 12.14, where it assumes that we have no increase because of the national insurance increase. Surely there's an employer's contribution increase. That's what I'm hearing. So I just wonder how we get to nil cost to the council.
Jim, can I ask you to comment on that one as well? Because once again, it's slightly more technical, isn't it? So thank you.
Yes, no problem. Morning, Councillor Andrews. There's two parts to it, really. Yes, there will be a national insurance increase for all employers. Public sector employers like us, we actually get that money back through grants. So there's a net nil impact to us as an employer of that charge. The bit that will impact on us is suppliers to us who will experience that as an increase in cost. They'll need to pass that on or absorb it. So that's down to the relationship that we have with them. So just for Dorset Council as an employer, net nil impact. It's an in and out for us, but our suppliers will experience that as a cost increase, and they'll need to talk to their customers about how they deal with it.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Can I now go to Councillor Biggs, please? I haven't forgotten you, Councillor Legg. I will come back to you when we have committee questions. But Councillor Biggs, please.
Yep, just get my camera on.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm a little concerned on the certainty around the savings, because there is just so many unknowns, and I'm not convinced that some of these savings will be realised. But I mean, that's a general comment. I suppose my particular concern, an example would be on children's services, and I know this is probably not one that you can answer directly, Aidan. It's somebody for children's services, really, but particularly around the tragic and awful death of Arthur Previously, when we had baby P death, the number looked after children rocketed. Within months, it went from 400 and something to 500 and something. Another 10, 20 looked after children can add millions to the budget line. Are the assumptions for savings that are perhaps in the children's services line, were they taken prior to that, or have they been adjusted? Or are we just saying that it's going to make no difference at all? Because I don't believe that. Thank you.
Okay, can I respond on a general point about management of risk, financial risk, and then, Chair, in terms of the implications for children's services, perhaps we could either draw Teresa in at this point or when we get to that item on the agenda. But if I could talk in general terms about the risks, I think I've laid out the volatility in the financial position, the uncertainty for the future, and what we've seen certainly last financial year and this financial year is kind of those shocks coming in through the pandemic or any other factor. The way that we manage our risk within the council financially is we've got a series of layers, a series of safety nets, as it were. So within the budget proposals you have in front of you, we do have a contingency budget. And so that contingency budget is effectively sort of unallocated funding that we use to, that's held centrally, that's used to absorb any sort of shocks. And that level of contingency for next financial year is currently at £5.4 million. So that's money was set aside to absorb any sort of initial shocks that come through. And then beyond that, we've got what we call our general fund reserve, which I sort of refer to as a safety net. So that's a general fund reserve that every local authority is required to hold. So that's reserve money that's not purposed for anything other than to absorb shocks and financial risk. Now that reserve at the moment for Dorset Council, and our intention is to keep it at a similar level for next financial year, is about £31 million. So we've got a reserve there of £31 million. And that CIPFA, the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, give guidelines on what's a reasonable level of reserve to hold for such shocks. And we're at the high end of that. They give a range, and we're in a fortunate position that we're able to set aside reserves at the high end of that to provide sort of a degree of, I wouldn't say comfort, but a degree of element that we can absorb any risks. And I think as part of their work that CIPFA do, they do some benchmarking, comparing local authorities across the country about the level of reserves they have. And the benchmarking shows that we're in the middle of the pack and the middle of the range for local authorities. So from my perspective, our ability to absorb, so we've the budget we've got in front of you, it is we've highlighted as high risk for the factors I've described, but we have got a contingency and then a general fund reserve to absorb some of those risks. And then finally, as part of the final budget proposals that will go through that go to Cabinet and full council, as the statutory finance officer, I have to give a written assessment of the risks associated with it and whether I'm comfortable with that element of a risk associated with the financial position. So I haven't done that yet because we've still got some funding to come through from national government. So in response to Councillor Biggs's question specifically, we haven't adjusted the budget proposals yet for the news that came through at the weekend. We haven't sort of sat down and said, gosh, as a consequence of that, there's going to be additional costs. But we have, when modelling the costs for children's services generally, have that sense of sort of the pressures coming, the pressures and the impact that a lockdown has had on families. So there is still time between now and the final budget going to Cabinet and then full council to make further adjustments, and that's something you might want to consider. But I think that's more the detail of which if you'd wish to bring in my colleague Teresa in at the right time, Chair, who could provide a fuller response.
If I can come in, if it's all right, Councillor Biggs, okay, Teresa is there. If Teresa, if you'd like to answer that question now, that would be absolutely brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Briggs. And I would just want to pause for a moment and acknowledge that the death of Arthur is one of those terrible events that happens at times in our society, and I think we've all seen the huge impact that's had on our country and on our county too, in terms of the impact upon people's lives around that. What I would want to say, and I'm hoping members, there'll be a members seminar on Monday evening in respect of Arthur and giving respect to his memory and thinking together about the impact of what that means for us as an authority. There clearly is a lot of elements in Arthur's case which we must be very mindful of around all of our work, but there are also particular elements which I think we must also hold on to the fact that most of our families want to care for their children and want better for their children than they had themselves. And so that's our principle as an authority, as we work to keep our children at home with their families, in their schools and in their communities wherever possible. Nothing around Arthur's case changes that determination for us, because many years of research shows that where it's safe to do so, bringing up our children within their families is what we want to support our families to do. We want to work with our families. But of course, shockwaves of things like the prosecution of Arthur's father and stepmother send shockwaves through the whole partnership, and we do see then a challenge to managing that risk in a managed way. So it's difficult to answer clearly, conclusively, with what will happen as a result in terms of how people experience life and how our partners experience the ability to manage that risk with us. But what I can assure you is that we will continue to work with the families of Dorset to keep them safe and sound as best as we possibly can, keeping their children at home where that's possible. The pandemic, we all knew, and it is absolutely significant that Arthur died at the beginning of this pandemic, in that first lockdown, when he wasn't in school and he wasn't being visited by health professionals. And the social workers that he were visiting were clearly visiting within pandemic limitations. We all know, we've known for the last 20 months that this pandemic was going to have a big impact on families. We've worked hard within Dorset Children's Services to reach further into communities with link workers into schools, with more early help where we can, staying stood up with face-to-face visiting wherever it was safe to do so. But it has been a challenge, there's no doubt about it. What you can be assured of is that we now know the children who we have very significant concerns about, and we do, obviously as a county, have many children as we look at when we look at the children's presentation, and we want to be confident that we're only bringing the right children into care at the right time, only for as long as necessary. So the short answer of Councillor Briggs is I don't know, because it would take a bit of a crystal ball, but on the basis that the best way to manage is to always have a grip on the need in your community, I have some confidence that us as an authority at this point have a grip on that need in our community. But it would be complacent of me to say I could be absolutely emphatic about that. So it may be something that this committee and others want to think about in terms of exactly as Aidan has described, some contingency for these extraordinary and extraordinarily unhappy this week times we are living in.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Is that okay, Councillor Biggs, or would you like to come back?
No, that's fine for the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got Councillor Gray. Did you wish to come back in on this section, or would you like to come in on future sections?
Back in on this section, if I may, okay. Chair.
Yep. Yes, please do then.
Two questions and a observation, really. On page 10, Aidan, you talk about the surplus collection money. I assume that's in the collection rate. Is that material? Is it? What sort of number is it?
Thank you. Can you give me a paragraph number, Councillor Gray? Sorry.
No, hang on a second. Page 10, size of surplus collection money for 21-22.
Yeah, so the 21-22, the collection fund surplus we've modelled is actually £3 million, and that's factored in to one of the appendices towards the back. It's sort of been a helpful collection, and there's sort of a combination of factors there, sort of catching up, sort of during the course of this year, but also collection from the previous year, sort of debt from the previous year that we've been able to bring forward, been able to collect. So that collection fund surplus is really sort of helpful and beneficial, but we're treating it as a one-off rather than an increase in the base.
That was my follow-up question. That you haven't assumed the collection rate will continue at that rate for 22-23, right? Okay. Thank you very much for that. Second question, really, 16.31 revs and benefits. Can't remember the page number. 16.31. I'm just interested in the cost of that service, given the changes that might likely to happen in 22-23. Is that realistic? Have you taken that into account in terms of the cost of the service?
So the revenues and benefits service on Cabinet on Tuesday this week agreed a new model for the revenues and benefits service about ending our relationship with BCP, setting up our own service. Our modelling of that would be a recurrent saving of approximately £730,000 per year. In the savings for next financial year, we've modelled in about 600 of that 730. So we're expecting a part year effect, or quite a large part year effect.
So that's net, obviously, with the increased staff usage, obviously, for that's net. Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, Councillor Gray, you're breaking up. Could you start that question again, please?
Yes. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes, I can.
On page 19, economic growth. Just a comment, really, rather than a question. My same comment about tone of transformation in terms of income generation. We do need, as a council, to really talk about income generation and growth in income generation. It's just a comment, not really for as a question. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Gray. Right, I've got no more non-committee members in the chat bar at the moment. So if I can go to the committee members now, could I go to Councillor Legg, please, for your questions?
Thank you, Chairman. Can I return to David Gray's opening remarks about inflation? As I understand it, Mr. Dunn, you've looked carefully at each of the sort of component parts of the budget and tried to assess as carefully as you can what the level of inflation is likely to be. And that's how you've come to the conclusion that it's 2%, not 2.5% overall. Is that how you've arrived at that situation?
So I've looked at the component parts, yes, and in particular, for example, energy is particularly high, but so that's given us a sense. But we've then applied a sense of how much of that inflation we expect the market, we expect our providers to absorb, as opposed to us fully fund. So we've looked at a basket of inflation measures and then applied a sort of an efficiency target to that inflation.
Yes, because when you get to paragraph 18.6, I think it is, let me have a quick look. Yeah, that gives quite a difficult view of how easy or difficult it's going to be to achieve that kind of inflationary target of 2%, doesn't it? Because it seems to suggest to me, reading that it's going to be quite a difficult ask, because you're essentially trying to put pressure on our suppliers. And although you said some of the contracts allow a supplier to negotiate or to achieve a inflationary increase, it's those contracts which you negotiate every year where you will be looking to achieve some savings and putting constraint effectively on the supplier to be efficient. And when you listen to Mr. McManus essentially saying about those same suppliers, they're going to have to absorb national insurance increases, you're going to put a huge amount of pressure on suppliers. And I just wonder, in particular, what kinds of suppliers you're going to be putting pressure on and what the consequence of that will be for the delivery of services. Are you effectively going to be driving some good suppliers to the wall and replacing them with rather bad suppliers in terms of quality of service?
Good question. So a few principles, if I could respond first of all. I think Councillor Suttle sort of describes how there isn't enough money to do everything that we want to do as a council. The proposals you've got broadly in front of you do talk about there's sort of within the detail, there's sort of staffing reductions within the council, there's and general efficiencies. So there's a general efficiency drive within the council, and yet that's only on half our area of spend. You know, in terms of staffing, represents about half our area of spend. The other half is through our suppliers. So I think given the constraints the local government is under, it's only fair that the council absorbs pressures, but so do our suppliers. So that's my first principle, that that we ought to share the pain in that regard. Secondly, I just want to go back to and emphasise a point. The 2% is an average. And within individual directorates, where there are high inflation elements, we've put additional funding. And probably the strongest example of that is within adult care. So adult care next year, I was mentioning, is getting a 10% budget uplift. So what adult care will receive will be a 2% for inflation plus a further element for market inflation, because what we're seeing in the care sector is the extraordinary pressure that they're under. You know, recruitment and retention is a real challenge for them at the moment. So we recognise that some of our suppliers are really going to be under pressure. So we've allowed for further inflation in that sector. What we're trying to do is to be more commercially minded in our approach and have a much more nuanced approach, individual conversations with individual suppliers. So in particular, an area that is strong within Dorset Council is our waste team, who have very strong relationships with their suppliers and have conversations that go along the lines of, what is it that we can do as a council differently that will help reduce your costs, supplier, and that's how they'll be able to reduce absorb some of the inflation pressures. So it's not always or necessarily a draconian thumping the table and say you can't have additional money. It's more of a nuanced conversation, sort of a relationship, a careful commercial relationship management. And then finally, as we go through a procurement cycle, we've got sort of a turnover of contracts, and we relet our contracts. We have to make sure that we don't just try and buy the same thing every year that we bought the previous year. We have to keep pace with technology, keep pace with innovation, and make sure that the needs of Dorset Council and in particular its residents are met. So hopefully I'm painting a picture that it's more nuanced than just literally saying 2% and that's it.
Okay, so two quick following points, if I may, Chairman. When you talked about sharing the pain effectively between the local authority and suppliers, looking at it from the local authority's point of view, if you look at 14.1 little Roman 4, and it talks about seeking to maximise savings from becoming unitary, essentially what we're talking about is shedding some more staff, I guess, isn't it? That's the first point. And the second point is, will we be coming back for another bite of or another discussion about this difficulty we have in terms of trying to assess what the right level of expenditure and the budget should be? The range which was given, I think, in terms of additional funding from the government was somewhere between 3.8 million and I think 9.3, and you're thinking that you're rather hoping you're going to get 4.5. So does that mean, and you were saying that it's got to be within £500,000 of that amount, so if we get £4 million or less from the government in the financial settlement on the 16th, does that mean we're definitely coming back to have another discussion about this in the new year?
Yes, I think that's what we're describing. So if we only get £4 million, then there will have to be £500,000 of further savings, efficiency, or indeed, potentially use of reserves. There's different options, so we'd have a short window to try and work up that detail. And if it has significant and material change on the budget proposals, i.e. it's more than £500,000, then we'd be looking to bring that and put it in front of you as a committee. Yes. Yeah.
And the staff savings?
The staff savings, so as you say, bullet point 4 there, seek to maximise the savings of becoming a unitary authority. So in the first year of becoming an authority, we removed the vast majority of duplication. So, for example, we took 10 million out of corporate services. And then the example I've just given around establishing our own Dorset Council Revenues and Benefits Service is another example of creating efficiency by becoming a unit. We've got a couple of other examples within the papers that we're still making sort of further efficiencies, for example, within IT, as we kind of get a real in-depth understanding of what we've inherited. So there's a general sense of trying to further maximise the benefits of becoming a unitary. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Aidan, can I just pick up on this inflation point, and apologies for jumping in, it's Chairman's prerogative. Can I ask what inflation rate was put in last year for our assumptions then? And the reason I'm asking this is because overall inflation was lower last year than it is this year. And I don't recall what inflation rate we put in last year, and I just wondered what it was and how it compares with this year.
So so many different years, this year, next year, last year. I'm not sure if here we go. We've got Heather has just put something in the chat bar, so I'll share that with listeners and viewers. So last year, our inflation, our equivalent figure was 1.5%. And what we actually did is we took that 1.5% of funding and held it in contingency. As Jim just said, we held it in contingency, and then every time one of our contract managers would talk to their supplier and say, and the challenge was to get the supplier, work with the supplier to absorb that inflation. And so we released the money from contingency as and when. And I think the reality is at this point that we haven't actually released or needed to release all of that 1.5%. Because our suppliers have worked so well with us. So it's that evidence base that gives us a confidence for next year. But I do quite, I recognise the challenge that inflation this year and at the moment and indeed next year is much more a significant factor than previously.
Okay. Thank you very much. I mean, the inflation part does give me concerns, and the fact that you're talking about negotiating with suppliers to bring down prices, yes, we absolutely should. But within the adult care sector, what always concerns me is that a lot of our residents that are employed by care in the care sector are on minimum wage. They're not even on the living wage. What I would be really concerned about is if in driving costs down, we're actually driving down pay scales within what is already a really poorly paid area. I think that is just a comment on that there is only so much squeezing that we can do without having a serious impact on the lives of an awful lot of our residents who work in Dorset.
Chair, could I just comment, if I may, and I'm hopefully I'm not overstepping my remit here. So we've talked briefly about what happens if we don't get £4.5 million from government. There is a scenario where we get more than £4.5 million from government, and wouldn't that be a nice Christmas? And of course, the devil will be in the detail. And what we haven't got in front of us is proposals of what we do with that money. My advice to the administration about if we do receive extra funding would be to set aside more in contingency to hedge against inflation. That would be the first call, because I absolutely recognise what you're saying. There's an element of risk here about our inflation. first of all, the affordability, but secondly, the impact on suppliers that you've just described. So my advice to the administration would be around to give real consideration to upping that inflation contingency. But in terms of trying to live within our means at the moment, based on our assumptions, the 2% I think is our best estimate.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Ireland wishing to come in.
There I am. Okay, yeah, thank you. Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, I've got lots of questions on the specific directorates, but this is more a general one, I guess. So if you look at the paper, so if we just take adults as an example, what we've seen to have done at Dorset Council for the last 3 years is have a base budget. So, adults is 28.5 million. The total budget is 142 million. So the comment I'd like to make is essentially, if you're looking at the paper in front of us, we don't have any detail of what's in that 128.5 million. So unless you go outside of the paper and delve deeper and ask questions elsewhere, or look at various sources of information, which I'm sure are out there. I'm sure Aidan will point me to the detail. But essentially, we're scrutinising in front of us basically 9% of the budget, of the total budget. So where I'm going with this is why, as Dorset Council, haven't we implemented any zero-based budgeting? So we're taking what we had before and tinkering with it. We're adding bits on, taking bits off. And it seems to me that as a new organisation, at some point, we should have started, or we should be, using zero-based budgeting. I appreciate that's a lot of work, and it's probably not something you would do across the whole organisation in 1 year. But is there any plan to actually do that going forward? Thanks.
Okay, great question. Thank you. First of all, I recognise that in terms of the context of the paper that we have in front of us is looking at the marginal budget changes, what's increasing, what's decreasing. The final budget paper that goes to Cabinet and then on to full council has a lot more detail. We see it every year in terms of what the levels of budget are within services. But regarding that specific point, this was the reason that we ran our budget cafe #1, which admittedly is not in the public domain. It's a private members briefing, but that was set aside a day to enable us to explore that very issue, about get under the detail of what's in the existing budgets and why, and then we can move on to the margins, what's changing, which is what this paper's about. In terms of zero-based budgeting of adult care, Councillor Suckler has been very clear with us when going through the budget setting process this year that he wants to get everything out on the table. What are the underlying pressures that perhaps we've rolled forward or haven't fully funded in previous years? He wants to get that out onto the table, and hence the large figure of 36 million or so that we'd identified as a budget gap back in October. And this has been run alongside within adults of a more sort of a fundamental review of expenditure and the market pressures that we're going to be facing over the next years, and indeed the demographic pressures as well. So whilst we haven't done an absolute forensic clean sheet going back to sort of building up the budgets and in minute detail, I think from my perspective, and certainly I'm sure the adult care team feel like they've gone into a much higher level of detail this year in going through the budget setting process than they have ever before. And I think, so much of the funding is sort of locked in with our suppliers, as I've described, about buying care packages and what have you. So I think the point of zero-based budgeting, if we look at beyond adult care within corporate directorate, that it was zero-based budgeted 3 years ago when we established the new council, because that's where the most duplication of services has been. And then within place services, they've gone on a more sort of chunked up version of zero-based budgeting. For example, the planning service has been redesigned and remodeled, and then the property and assets team has been redesigned and remodeled. So we've gone through on a much more staged process within place. And then, of course, during the course of this year, children's services, their blueprint for change was a fundamental redesign of the model and a recosting of the model as well. So I think in that context, I think we've got a clear sight that we've looked at our budgets for those 3 directorates, and adults, given the high level of spend and the high level of activity that they've involved with, it's been more of a sort of a higher level rather than a zero-based budget review. But I think we've certainly got under the skin more now as we sort of approach the end of the 3rd year of the council than we have ever before. So I'd kind of hand back to you, Chair, on that response.
Is that okay, Councillor Ryland, or do you have any supplementaries?
No, yes, very comprehensive. I was obviously highlighting the fact that that our budget cafes weren't public, so we didn't. Obviously, anybody watching this didn't get any of that information.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Ryland. Councillor Rennie.
Yes, can I ask? And I think it's more to do with public health, but it's the impact on the services that come within our remit, which is adults, young people and children, along with community safety. Because obviously we don't have the public health figures, but I'm worrying about what's coming rolling down the tracks to us as well now, is the impact on people's mental health. We're hearing it everywhere now, and I know it's not within the gift of this council, but we obviously have to buy in the services, and we have to be sure these services are there. And we are all must be hearing now the lack of counsellors, the lack of time to even have your initial assessment. We are hearing of people having to pay privately to see people. Again, I think to some extent it mirrors the care need for people, and that there just isn't enough people to deliver the services. And I'm just wondering, is there lines within our budget to enable us within the services I've mentioned to be able to purchase as and where we need it from statutory and non-statutory services, as well as public health? And also, can we just ask with public health, when we receive their budget headings, if there is again this need, awareness of this need to have more cost figures in there for us, because this will impact on our adults, our children and young people services, and within community safety.
So in response to that, I think if I could invite my colleague Jim to come in to comment for a moment, or Sam, on the public health budget, because we haven't got a great deal of detail in front of you in this paper. So in terms of the financial context, Sam may wish to comment, and then kind of in terms of the service aspect, that might be for slightly on later on in the agenda. But yeah. Shall I hand over to Sam to take over at that point? Thanks, Sam.
Hi, thanks very much. Good morning, Councillor Rennie. It's a really, really good question. It's one that we are very, very alert to at the moment, thinking about the recovery from the pandemic. I think my quick response would be that a lot of mental health service is the responsibility of the NHS.
Yeah.
And we obviously work very, very closely with NHS organisations. We work through a system group, which is looking at things like mental health promotion, suicide awareness, a whole range of mental health training and development for frontline professionals, but also making sure that those organisations in the system are better equipped at supporting people with what I would call low-level mental health issues. There are other areas of the budget where increasingly there are funding streams that are coming down nationally. So, for example, in schools, there is new money that's paid for targeted mental health support workers in schools. But the fact remains that you have identified a gap between the need for sometimes low-level counselling provision and what our local system is able to provide. We are very alive to it. I think it's a much bigger topic for discussion. I'd just make the point that the public health budget, which I'm going to go into in a bit more detail later on in the session, we tend to take on responsibility for the prevention side. So we do a lot of work around suicide prevention, mental health promotion, but we don't directly fund mental health services per se. They are commissioned by Dorset Clinical Commissioning Group. But I just remind members of the opportunity as we come together as an integrated care system, there's huge potential to rethink how we use all of our resources to better support people with these conditions.
Thank you very much, Sam, and thank you for your question. Councillor Rennie, do you have any supplementaries?
No.
Okay, I've got one question, which is something that comes up every year that really does concern me. It refers to the multi-year spending review and the need for a multi-year yet again. And I noticed your comment, you said we are craving more of a settled system where we have more in year, we know, have some sort of certainty. I just think it's appalling that we're only getting a single year by the looks of it again, that we're not getting 3 year. I would say 3 years is an absolute minimum. You couldn't, as the saying goes, you couldn't run a Welk store like this from 1 year to the next, trying to work out what we're going to get and where we're going to get it. And to some extent, I can make a political comment because we've got a Conservative government. We've got all Conservative MPs down here. How much pressure is being put on the government to actually sort this out? Because it can't only be our council, it's got to be right the way across the country that councils are asking for a multi-year settlement. And it really is down to the government. So are there any moves being made, any noises from this council being made to central government to sort this, both from ourselves and from through our MPs?
So, Jill, can I, Chair, I'll invite Councillor Wharf to comment on that in a second,
yeah.
But can I just give you a finance professional perspective on this? So we are, absolutely, we're craving certainty, and all the rhetoric, all the noise, or that we were expecting a 3-year settlement. But just before the autumn statement, or around about the autumn statement, we'd got a new Secretary of State in terms of Michael Gove, but also the new information was coming out about the way that residential care will be funded in the future, and the cap and that side of things. What we're hearing from the sector is, because the full detail of how that's going to work hasn't been worked through, what government or what Treasury didn't want to do was to lock in local government into a 3-year, this is exactly what you've got, because they don't know how the mechanics of how the residential care charging model is going to work. So I've got a degree of sort of sympathy in the sense that if the funding was too low to be able to afford the new model, then at least we're not locked into that level. On the other hand, yes, I need a 3-year settlement to be able to sort of sleep and plan a bit better at night. So that's kind of my sort of finance professional response. But can I invite Councillor Wharf to comment in on the politics? Thank you.
Yeah, please do. And I apologise, Councillor Wharf, for not having given you the heads up on this question.
It's not a problem, Councillor Taylor. Normally the committee operates in a relatively non-political fashion.
I know.
I take this as just a reasonable general political question rather than anything, because we are all trying to achieve the best for the residents of Dorset. Myself and the leader and the chief executive have a meeting every month with our MPs, and we have been lobbying them for fairer funding and more appropriate funding. And fairer means that our rate support grant is just not sensible in the circumstances, and the rates that we charge are a reflection of the lack of support from government in a variety of things. And appropriate is almost exactly as you say. And I went to an LGA conference a few weeks ago, at which I questioned a number of ministers about this, and they took the point. They said they entirely understood why we wanted a multi-year settlement, but in the light of the pandemic and in the light of the issues that were occurring at short notice, they were more inclined to do individual settlements until they saw a greater degree of continuity. You probably aren't very sympathetic to that, and I'm certainly not, but that is the answer I got. We are representing Dorset Council with both our MPs and ministers at regular and frequent intervals, and we are not shy in telling them of our views and the fact that we feel Dorset has not been properly and effectively funded for a number of years. We are doing our best on that. Please be assured of it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wolf, and I'm really heartened to hear that. It's been a frustration of mine for many years that this, yeah, we seem to sort of go from one year to the next, and not being able to plan effectively has a huge impact on our services. So I'm so glad that you are pursuing that one, and that wasn't intended to be a political statement at all.
No, I didn't take it as such.
Okay, as you know, this committee is apolitical and should be apolitical.
I took it more of a comment that you guys might have something of an in with the people who make the decisions. What are you doing to try and get in their shoe and put a big stone there? And the answer is a lot.
Okay, thank you very much. On this section, I've got 3 councillors who haven't asked any questions yet. So could I just go to Councillor Gorringe, Councillor Penfold and Councillor Pipe, please, and ask if you've got any questions?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I've listened to everything that's been said, and some of the questions that have been asked are probably some of the questions that I would have asked myself. So, yeah, I'm quite happy with what's been said. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Gorringe. Have I got Councillor Pipe and Councillor Penfold?
Councillor Pipe, Chairman.
Hello. Have you got any questions, Councillor Pipe?
No, like Councillor Gorringe, I've listened to what's gone on, and there were a number of things I would have liked to have brought up, but they've already been said. But I do understand that the inflation rate that's used is the inflation rate of Dorset Council. It's not the national inflation rate, and that needs to be made really quite clear by Aidan if he could do that. It's not the national inflation rate that we're talking about. It's the inflation rate that affects the running of Dorset Council. That's the only extra thing I would have said.
Okay, thank you very much. And Councillor Penfold? Are you there, Councillor Penfold? Okay. Oh, sorry, I thought I heard you coming in. If you've got any questions, please come on later on in the agenda. If I can now move to the next part of the agenda then, which is for presentations around adult services. So if I can ask Vivian Broadhurst, who's the Interim Executive Director for People Adults, to do quite a short presentation, and then we'll take questions on her part of this agenda. Thank you, Vivian. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Councillor. Good morning, committee, and thank you very much for inviting us to share with you our budget proposals in adult social care. So we've got a few slides I think will help give a little bit of background and to some of the conversation we've already been having this morning. Hopefully that the subsequent slides will help that conversation. So our adult social care budget is, we see is a very positive investment for the council to meet the needs of the people in Dorset, our neighbours, our families, our friends and our residents. And although the social care budget remains challenging, this is the same for every local authority. And it isn't unique to Dorset, but it's really keen that we focus today on what it means for our Dorset residents. I have a few slides to share, and which set out the current climate and the market pressures that Dorset Council is working within and the associated costs. We also will cover the 22-23 proposed budget and the rationale for this. And thirdly, I'll share with you some of the actions that we are taking short and longer term to control the spend and to meet need. And hopefully this gives a sort of further focus for what's in the budget papers on section 16.2 to 16.6. So moving on, and Steve helpfully is sharing the slide. So moving on, thank you very much. So we just wanted to share with you just to illustrate some of the current pressures that adult social care is working within, and we've talked, we have reflected a little bit on this morning. The slide sets out the current pressures that we're working with, and the infographics give you some sense of the data and insights that are available and that we have used to start building up this budget, and to give us really good intelligence and data, which are helping to form the rationale for why we are coming today with the suggestions in the budget that we are. The areas of the context that we are delivering services in, as you will see from the slide, and we've talked about, is a real increase in demand for our services, and the cost pressures are increasing. Whilst we have been in COVID, that's significantly changed. It's a national trend for all of adult social care. You will have kept hearing that on the media and have heard that again today. However, in Dorset, we have additional pressures, which we have touched on, which are the demographic pressures and the rurality pressures. The average cost of individual care packages has also increased 18% since pre-COVID levels. As you will also see on this slide, and we have talked about, social care budgets are strained as ever, and if we have limited abilities to get into funds that we've just talked about on a long-term basis. We are passported through a number of funding streams via health, but this still remains that we are still working hard to meet our statutory duties within the financial envelopes that we have at present. As you'll see, an increase in financial hardship, and we've talked about this quite a lot at the Scrutiny Committee and in other areas, about what we've seen during COVID in the last 2 years is an increase in financial hardship, in homelessness, mental ill health, domestic abuse, and families working and living under considerable pressure. And we'll touch on this as we go through the presentation, but also we will be looking at this more in Andrew's presentation on housing and domestic abuse. So the other area that I just want to draw your attention to is the longer term impact of COVID on the health system, which you are absolutely aware of, and that, as you are hearing daily in the news, this is having a major impact on the amount of people that are going through the health system and that have awaited elective surgery that now are turning up both at the health front door and adult social care front door, and in much more of a crisis and requiring much more than average care than was purchased previously, and this is being purchased unfortunately at a higher cost due to market demands. So moving on to slide 3. So this is just an indication that we've shared this with the committee before and in other forums, but this has been very fundamental to how we have built up the budget this year. It's very clear on this slide that the long-term financial projections for the cost of care indicate a 7% rise year on year for the cost of care over the next 10 years. This is higher than the figures in the audit office report that you can see on your right there that we've talked about previously. That our increase is coming out at around, for 22-23, 10%, that 10.3 million. This is 7% increase, and this is reflected in what you see before you in the budgetary ask, given the pressures year on year for adult social care. Just to be clear, as Ada mentioned, that this budget is is built from a clearer understanding and an evidence base than we've previously used, and the spend in adult social care is not uncontrolled spend, but is the reality of pressures in the adult social care environment in which we're working. So we can go into more of that, but if any of your committee members want to look into that documentation, that supports the conversation that we're having today. So moving on to slide 4. So this slide, a little bit busy, but this slide sets out our proposed budget required. This year's budget was set, realistically, as I was saying, based on good evidence and understanding of demand coming forward, and the changes to practice that would support the workforce to undertake and our providers to be able to continue to provide to our residents. Achieving this baseline does mean transformation and tactical changes that are being implemented, but this gives us a really helpful and stable starting position to do that work from. As I've set out in the previous slide that we've just looked at, this has been evidence based on all of our information and a national data set about the cost of care. The budget pressures that set out on the right-hand side show our starting position and the actual cost of the increases to the directorate, the known pressures and the new costs presented by changes in legislation or practice that we are currently underfunded by at the moment, and that funding is unclear at present. We have offset this by a series of transformation that we've undertaken and savings and efficiencies within the directorate. And we are focused on delivering transformation programme that looks at prevention and early intervention, and working closely with our colleagues in public health and our CCG in primary care and acute colleagues. We are redesigning services and our offer to residents and making sure that the workforce is ready for the future across the Dorset patch, so we will be much more agile and able to meet those demands. We are looking to work more closely and partner with our providers in health and in primary care, so that we're able to shape and stimulate the market, because that's really going to be key for us to be able to transform services and work in partnership with those providers. And I'll show a bit more of that in more detail as we go to the next slide. As you can see on this slide, and finally, we have set out our strategic plan over the next 2 to 5 years, which does involve a much more closer working relationship with our community and our health partners, and working at place, so that we've got the right services in the right place and the right time, so that people are well informed about what they need to do to keep safe and well, how overall of the services can support them, and early intervention and recovery services can really help them stay well and independent. And we've got a really tight and clear focus on that. We've got a workforce plan, because that's going to be absolutely key to moving from where we are now to where we get to in the future. Improving capacity and sufficiency in the market and in our own internal workforce is going to be key. We're doing lots of work across with our health partners across the system, and looking at emerging markets of good practice, emerging models, should I say, of good practice, because there are many that we are adopting and adapting our own support, so that we can reflect the best that there is out there, so we're making the best use of our resources and able to support our workforce, because we know that whatever we will be doing immediately and in the near future, we will need to continue to build up that workforce and support that workforce to be able to deliver. We've also focused on what do we need to do differently across the whole of our Dorset council area to make sure that we are able and fit for supporting those people in the future coming years, as people needs have changed, and as they're changing and there's higher acuity, and that means that people are coming with much more complex care needs in an older cohort of people. That means we really do need to have a very flexible offer that's able to meet that, both the sort of front end of the service where we're talking about early intervention and prevention and supporting people to stay well as possible with small supports of care, right the way through to those people that absolutely do need us to be able to provide that high level of support for those complex needs, for those people that are living with really complex health and care needs. So we're wanting to work right the way through that, and we're beginning to pull together a really positive transformation around that. And as I've said, that we are realigning our support and recovery services and how people are supported in the community before they come into hospital, as they're in hospital, and as they leave hospital, so that people are supported all the way through their journey. And we focus on pre-admission and post-admission and how people live well in the community. And that means that we have to have a very clear and different offer across our with our system colleagues that's really very supportive and agile to meet those needs. And as I've said, we are absolutely looking to transform all areas of our care services and working much more closely with our providers in partnership, so we've got a really good offer. And that will be an offer looking across the whole of the county, but also what do we want to do on a much more patch-based approach with our provider colleagues. So in summary, adult social care has had, as we've been talking all the way through this morning, as others have had, 2 years of extremely difficult pressures, and these pressures are continuing. That we are dealing with COVID across our health service and our social care systems and our provider systems, and it is having an impact across all of those infrastructures. And we are under tremendous pressure with a very tired and fragile workforce working in all of these areas. Despite all of this, the Adult Social Care Directorate has been working exceptionally hard to really manage and understand the pressures that we have, to understand how we can maximise all external funding, all of our resources, and continue to provide good outcomes for people, because that's absolutely what we want to be focused on. We've done the groundwork in aiming to have a very solid budget position that reflects much more of the true need that we have worked through using national, local and supportive data from many sources, that allows us to come here today with a much more formed requirement for adult social care. Finally, of course, there are risks to demand-led budgets. But this that we put before you today is our very best estimation of the demand and costs that we know about, that the actions that we want to take to improve our position, and all that we have available before us at this present time. And as you well know, this gives us a good platform for developing what we need to do to get sure that we have as much as grip, and we're able to deliver to the very best for our residents. But of course, you know, we all know that there are unplanned factors that will come in and are in the ether at the moment that may well affect this budget. But I think we are in a strong position to have laid out some good evidence and data that supports the ask today. Thank you, Chair. From mute, Jill.
Sorry, thank you very much, Vivian. That was a really good presentation and extremely useful. And if I can just acknowledge the pressures that our systems are on at the moment, particularly through the hospital and Opal 4 and everything else that's going on, I think you're doing an exceedingly good job. However, we're here to look at budgets. So if I can go to non-committee members first, and I have Councillor David Taylor in as an RTS, and I've also got Councillor Canning. So if I can take Councillor Taylor first of all, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. It was really interesting to see that the facts we've known for the last 3 years regarding the increase of the elderly population, how we're going to have trouble recruiting our specialist carers. Can I go back to the first slide, please? Because it's got actually numbers there. I'm sorry, it's dropped off. I think it was 173,000, and it was a requirement was 150,000 people. I think it was. Can I come back to that?
Steve, do you want to put it back the slides, please?
I can. It would be just a couple of moments to come through.
Thank you very much. The overall question, sorry.
Sorry, and can I, Chair, is it okay? I think it would be helpful to ask Steve and Leslie to join us so we can fully answer any questions and they'll introduce themselves as questions arise. So thank you.
Yes, that's absolutely fine. Thank you.
Apologies, just having a slight technical issue this end, but it will be with you in just a moment.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve.
Oh, great. Right, now it's the...
And thank you, Leslie, for coming in as well.
There we go. That slide, that's fantastic. On the second row down, sixth bubble, it says by 2029, 150,000 people will retire. There'll be 20,000 new jobs created, leaving 173,000 jobs to fill. Now, that's a big question, and the thing is that it's a question we've all been asking ourselves over the last 2 years, because we know Dorset is ageing rapidly. How are we going to go and fill these positions? That's my question.
So I and thank you for the question, because I think it's absolutely a pertinent question to ask. I think where we are, and I'll take the Southwest perspective and the Dorset perspective, and then I know that Steve and Leslie will want to come in with some specifics. So where we are in the Southwest, we are in the most difficult position in terms of workforce, and when I'm talking about workforce in the main, the first point I'll make is we're talking about the provider workforce, so our carers workforce that support people to either live in their own homes and to be in residential and nursing care, and also those health colleagues that are supporting people in the health system. So in the Southwest, that we are in the lowest quartile of staffing because of the rurality that we have across the Southwest, and because of the older population, which Dorset has a highest bit of as we've discussed, and as you'll see in this slide, has the highest percentage of older people in the county. But across the Southwest, of course, that's reflected all the way and across all of our 15 counterparts. So the work that we are doing across the Southwest is a joint piece of work across the NHS and across local authorities and councils to address and look at how we stimulate that workforce, how we encourage people to remain in our economy, in our local authorities, so that we can invest in them. And we'll come when we talk about housing, we'll see that we'll pick up that thread there, that if people are supported to stay in school, in education, that we have good training and support in those areas from early on, that we make it an attractive and career led approach then, and value care in the way that we see the value when as we become users, that we then start to see the value. We are working right the way across from working with, and I'm sure Children's will pick this up, but working from children, young people, right the way through to students, and with universities to look at how we encourage and promote the value of care. Also, not only does that bring people remaining in the community and the local authority bring money into the economy and the local economy, so people are spending more money in Dorset, it also supports our younger people to remain in the county, so that we are then have a pipeline of the workforce that is able to deliver in these areas. So we are working on all of those fronts, and with providers and with businesses, to really promote this, from both having apprenticeships to having good strategic partnerships with health and with providers and universities, to really invest in our workforce, because that is the only thing that will make the difference here. So I hope that answers your question in terms of, yes, we have got a problem, yes, we understand it, and from a county council's perspectives right the way through to adult social care and to Dorset perspective, we're working on many different levels to support that.
That's a really, really great answer. Thank you very much. And I've noticed in the figures that the fact is we've actually at long last included the support from 0 to 25 in our care needs. So that's going to be great news for Dorset and all. Thank you very much. That was really great news.
Okay. Thank you very much for your question, Councillor Taylor. Could I go to Councillor Canning now, please, for his question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Two questions, actually. The first one more of just to get my head wrapped around it. The figure in Appendix 1, when you talk about general inflation, how does that relate to the figures that Jim Mortimer was commenting earlier on in the sidebar about holding a fund centrally that you to control the spending of money that is nominated as inflation? So how do those two figures relate together, basically?
I can see that Aidan's come in on this, and I know probably Steve or Leslie will want to add to it. So I'll let Aidan come in, and then we'll see if there's anything further that we can add to that.
Thank you. So if I may, Councillor Canning, so we've modelled 2% average inflation for the organisation, and are planning to hold that as a contingency. And in addition, because of the high risks that Vivian's just described, there's an additional inflation allocation for adults. So this amount, the 3.6 million in Appendix 1, will be transferred into the adults budget, whereas other elements of inflation will be held centrally within a contingency. So it's in recognition of this point that we've made, that the high risk and the high inflation pressures experienced by adults.
So does the central bit, is that just the 2% forecast you're talking about, and this bit is effectively a separate amount? An additional amount, yes. Yeah. Okay, thank you for clearing that. Yes, that answers that point. So, and my other question is to do with the savings not achieved. Were these savings that were penciled into the medium-term financial plan and have not achieved about £5.5 million worth of savings there? And if that is what the case, why have they not been achieved? Basically, what's the factor that's stopping these savings being made?
Can I invite Leslie in to just talk through that? I mean, it is very much on the basis of what we put in the slides that we can talk through in detail. Leslie, do you just want to pick this up?
I can. Thank you very much. So I'm Leslie Hutchinson, the Corporate Director for Adult Commissioning, and thank you, Vivian. So you will see that there's a figure in there. We have reduced that further this month by a further 600,000 actually, which will demonstrate a further improvement. I have to say that we have been really working hard in our services to try and achieve those transformation plans, and we did have thorough arrangements and programmes in place. However, the impact of COVID has deflected some of the work that we needed to do in that area, because we've had to move some of the resource around in order to cope with the additional pressures that have come in. So it has delayed some of those schemes taking place. Some of them we are rolling forward some from this year into next year, and we hope to be further building on those savings that didn't come to fruition now. But it's mainly been due to COVID, if I'm perfectly honest.
Right, so you do still anticipate getting the savings, but it's just going to take longer than was originally anticipated.
We don't anticipate getting all of those savings because some of them aren't the priority now, given what's happened with COVID, which is why we've put in a different set. The ones particularly around day opportunities are absolutely rolling forward, because we've got a forthcoming strategy coming out, which will hope to set out how we're going to achieve that. So that is in the pipeline.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Canning. Could I now, are there any other questions from non-committee members? I haven't got any more in the chat bar at the moment. So with that, I'll go to committee members. Councillor Ireland, would you like to come in, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I should probably have declared this earlier. I need to make a declaration, I guess, because I'm going to ask a question. So I'm our partner governor on Dorset Healthcare. So I represent Dorset Council as a governor at Dorset Healthcare. My wife works at Yeovil Hospital and she's in charge of the ITU amongst other things. So this is relevant to the question I'm going to ask. And I also have a daughter who's working as an ST1 at DCH, currently on the oncology ward. So if Fiona could note those, please. So I did have 3 question areas, but Councillor Canning's just covered one of them, so I'll leave that one out. One of them is quite complex, I guess, in more detail, and then the other one is probably easy. So I've just declared an interest in several of my family members, and as the governor, I was at a council of governors meeting this week for Dorset Healthcare, and Eugene, the chief exec, mentioned one of the big problems they have, we have as a trust, is discharging patients into community, either to home or into a home, a care home, or whatever, just getting some sort of care package. And my wife, she runs the ITU. Obviously she doesn't discharge people straight into community, but it's the hospital's a system. So to get somebody out of ITU, they have to go somewhere else, usually critical care, and they have to leave critical care to go somewhere else. So in the end, you have to get out of the hospital to free up a bed. And the final thing was my daughter. Last week I was talking to her. She's currently working on the oncology ward at DCH, and she finds it quite distressing that a lot of the people who come into the ward, they're going to die, and they're going to die very quickly, and quite often that's news to them. And she has to explain to them and their families that basically to get a care package, it takes about 4 weeks. So a lot of these people are actually dying in hospital when they could be dying somewhere else in a far better environment. But we see in our budget that we plan to save costs by controlling the hospital discharge program. So it seems to me that we need to be putting a lot more effort into getting people out of hospital, providing more support. And I just see that there's a conflict here. I think we need to be putting more money into trying to support these people. So I'm trying to understand how we're going to save money and how that works. Now, I'm well aware of the hospital discharge service model, which the government imposes on trusts, and that, but the way you should work. So I'm looking for an explanation why we can save money on this, basically. So it's a very long preamble for a very short question.
No, and thank you, Councillor Ireland. And I know Steve will want to come in on this answer because we have been doing a lot of work in this area, and we absolutely share the concern that you've raised about the pressure in the system and the fact that it is very difficult both to get people into acute and care and also to be able to discharge people. We have as every other local authority is experiencing at the moment, a profound lack of care available to us. So we are working very hard with our providers in every which way to look at how we maximise the support that we can get from our care providers, what we can do differently every single day, every moment of every day. We are trying to flex the care around to make sure that those people that need to be out of hospital or in fact need to be supported to remain at home, that we are using our availability of care that we've got across the system, because care isn't just in adult social care, it's how we use the resources from our primary care colleagues and our healthcare colleagues to make sure that we can support people in the best way possible, and also how our VCSE are supporting us. So we're absolutely doing everything possible, because we do not want anybody to either go into an acute hospital or to go into hospital care that doesn't need to, and those people that are spending time in there need to be there for the shortest time possible. So we absolutely get that. I think where Steve will clarify in a moment what we're actually saying in terms of how are we investing in our budget to make sure that we are providing the right care in the right time. He'll talk about that, and also what we're doing as a system to use the collective resources that we have, both with our health colleagues and primary care colleagues and public health, to really look at how we maximise what we have together to support the system as a whole, because it's only if the system is working as a whole that both health and care can work effectively together. And there are problems with the funding and how it is funded and passported through to adults and through health, which do cause some ripples, but of course in a system we're having those conversations to make sure that does not get in the way of how we actually work on the ground and support people. The other element is that I think it's really important that the people that are care funded under the legislation, there's various bits of legislation that we all work from and that we're funded to work from. So anybody that is funded under end of life care or continuing health care for people that've got complex health needs, and those people that are coming out of having had an intervention in mental health services are funded via health free at the point of access. So it's really important that we make sure as a system, and part of our job definitely is to make sure that the right people are funded from in the right way, so they're getting the right clinical support, but are also not being charged for services that they absolutely need and should not be adult social care charged services, because that is not how the system is meant to work, and it's right and proper that people do not pay for those health services as they are free at the point of access. So I'll just let Steve pick up on the hospital discharge funding and the model of Home First that we're working with our partners that may help understand a little more about that. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Vivian. I think you've done a very thorough explanation of some of that, so I'll only pick up a few further points. So, Councillor Ireland, this is a really priority area of importance for adult social care. We are in the enviable position of both helping support the hospitals by doing our day job, which is making sure we support people really well in the community. So every single intervention that we do for people remaining at home helps people not to enter hospital in the first point, and that is one of our main key functions as adult social care. But we absolutely then have a secondary function of supporting both community hospitals and acute hospital trusts in that discharge program. And I will be truthful and honest in saying that is during the COVID period been a really difficult balance to get right, to make sure that we can both support the flow of individuals coming out of hospital in a really positive way, but then really making sure that we support the hospitals by supporting people to not have to enter hospital in the first place. So two very different priorities that we need to make sure. As you've alluded to, the hospital discharge program that central government put in has helped us take some steps towards having a really good program of hospital discharge in place, but is not anywhere near we want to be for our ambition. And I think if we had the slides back up, and apologies, I can't do both the slides and the coming back on as part of this, 5 items out of the 5 items on our strategic plan help support the hospital discharge program. So when we look at about sort of realigning the support and recovery for people entering and leaving hospital, when we talk about high acuity care, when we talk about workforce planning, all of those are absolutely aligned around supporting our emerging Home First model of supporting people to come out of hospital as quickly as possible in the right way with the right support to get them back on their feet, having the best possible lives afterwards and not needing ongoing care needs wherever possible. That is absolutely our stated aims, and the national best practice models support that. So we as Dorset Council, alongside BCP and all of our health partners, have got a really solid programme of work of making sure that is a plan which turns into action As you can imagine, during the both COVID period and a winter period, that's quite difficult to make sure that we can balance those priorities of here and now today and the pressures that you will be acutely aware of by your family members, but also about making sure that we start to do those change pieces that start to make a real difference to people's lives as they come out of hospitals as they do this. So absolutely is, I would say, one of our top 3 priorities in adult social care department to make sure that we get right, and a real big area of focus for all of the partners across the health and social care system.
Is that okay, Councillor Ireland?
Yes, that's fine, thank you. I've got 2 more questions, if I may. I'll just throw them both out there to try and speed things up. Save coming back to me. So, the first one was, I heard earlier this week, I don't know if it's true, but I was told this when I was actually at the Council of Governors for Dorset Healthcare, that Dorset ICS, which is obviously planned to come into existence in April next year, and it has the unfortunate acronym of DIGS, so I can see a name change coming on soon. But I heard that basically it might not happen in April, and it might get pushed back for 6 months, possibly to October. So my first question is, if that happens, will that affect our budget in any way? And the second question, very briefly, I think I already know the answer, but for the benefit of the Scrutiny Committee, in 16.5, we have a quote. It says we're going to be helping providers with local recruitment. So Vivian's already mentioned that recruitment is really difficult in Dorset. So my question is, how are you going to do that? And is there any cost to Dorset Council in doing so? Thank you.
So if I can just pick up the ICS question, I hadn't heard that, but I'm clear that the work that we're doing and the budget that we've got in front of us is absolutely driven by the system that we've got in place at the moment, and that will continue ahead. Everybody's absolutely committed across our current ICS and the incoming ICS chairs that this is a priority, so that will not that doesn't change. And I think there's some real opportunities that we are taking now to really develop it. So I wasn't aware of any delays likely, but that will not change both the work that we're undertaking, the pace that we're going at, and what we're presenting today. And in terms of workforce, I think if I can just say, and I'm sure Steve will come in on the how are we developing our workforce plan. Yes, it is very difficult, and yes, it is very difficult in Dorset. That's why we can't do it on our own, and that's why how we are working with our providers and how we're using our grants and workforce grants and potential monies coming through announcements that have been made in the white paper, that we will be able to use that in a proactive way to support providers, because it's absolutely to be making sure that it's to go into the workforce to provide our providers with a sort of framework that we work together on. So we've got a really good pipeline and a career development for those workforce, that we've got it just for the immediate and also for the longer term. And I know Steve will just give a few details on what that's going to look like.
Councillor Ireland, some really good questions. So Vivian has touched on most of the areas again. We have a number of specific grants that have been passported through, both either related to COVID or winter pressures money. So, for example, the Comp Fund, the Workforce Grant Retention Fund, and Infection Outbreak Control Fund and IPC funding. All of these have been used in targeted ways. So I'd like to say there's a one-size-fits-all, but because adult social care covers both the breadth and depth of providers and marketplaces, we do specific interventions for specific workforce. So, for example, residential might be different to home care, which is different to learning disability support. So we've immediately, whenever we've received funding, we work with our partner providers to make sure that actually we respond back to the challenges and the difficulties that they face. So to answer the specific question around, is it a cost to us? In some parts, it is a little bit, and you've seen some of our increasing costs that have come through in this budget pressure to next year, but certainly an element of it is funded by specific grants that have come through, and we use that in a really targeted, intelligent, data-led way to support the marketplace in the best way. But it is still very, very challenging to make sure that we're supporting providers in the way that they need all of the time.
Thank you. That's fine.
Jill, you've got Peter Wolf wanting to come in. Jill, you're on mute.
Sorry, my phone keeps going, which is why I'm muting.
Peter wanting to come in.
Yeah. Would you like to come in at this time, Councillor Wolf?
I would, just to address the comments that Councillor Ireland made. I took part in the recruitment process for the new chief executive for the ICS, and I have a meeting with her next week. We're having coffee together. It may now be a virtual coffee, and we have got a number of things we wish to discuss before she starts in April. She is extremely excited about her job, and I think she's an excellent choice. This rumour hasn't reached me, and I would prefer, rather than making this sort of rumour potentially public and then having to try and drag it back, if people could ring me beforehand and just say, is there any truth in this? Because I can then go and ring the person that we are now talking about. All my information is that it is due to start in April, and that the organisation is geared up and is quite excited. And I have already talked to the new chief executive, the chief executive to be, about how we might reset the relationship with local government. So I will follow this up, and I have nothing further to add to Vivian's comments about its effect on the budget, but I can assure you we are attempting to establish relationships with the organisation and with the chief executive at a very early stage. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. If I can move to the next question now, that's a question from Councillor Legg on this section. Could I just interrupt though, just for a second, because there may be a problem with the presentation from housing. Can I just have clarification on that, please? Because I understand the person who is supposed to be presenting has got to leave fairly shortly. So if somebody can tell me on the chat bar about timings for all this, I'd be very grateful.
Thank you. There's no problem, Jill. It's Graham has the problem with the time.
Okay, righty-ho. Thank you very much, Andrew. I'll come to you shortly. Sorry, would you like to carry on, Councillor Legg?
Thank you very much, Chairman. I will be very brief and say, in that case, conscious of what's been said in the chat bar, to ask Vivian Broadhurst if she could circulate the slideshow that she's presented from, and to say, secondly, that the last but one of those slides, when I was trying to read it on the chat on the screen, I had considerable difficulty in trying to reconcile that with Appendix 1 in the report. I could excuse me, I could identify 3 areas in the Appendix 1, which, and I'm just getting it on screen now to look at it, where I could identify about £15.5 million worth of costs. And I was trying to work out how that overlapped with the £14.75 million worth of budget pressures. And the 3 elements that I'd identified there was the 3.6 million pounds in relation to general inflation, 5.5 million in relation to unachievable savings in 21-22, and 6.6 million in relation to adult care packages. And that, perhaps when you come to circulate the slides, you could try and explain how those 2 elements sort of can be reconciled.
Councillor Legg, I think we could probably just give some clarity now, but we will also, as we when we circulate the slides, we'll make sure that's added in for clarity. But Steve, do you just want to pick up on that?
Yes, I'll try and be brief. And Councillor, again, thank you for the insightful question on this. Some elements you would have seen in our presentation. We said that we have absorbed as costs into year. So that's why you might be having some difficulties reconciling Appendix 1 to our presentation. As you can imagine, we've tried to keep the high-level presentation quite brief in some of this, but we were more than happy to provide some detail on some of those areas that we as an directorate have decided to cover at cost within our pressures carrying into next year. So that will be why you might be having a slight difficulty covering those two off, and that's been part of the budget setting process that we've done in the background with colleagues in finance to make sure that we cover through. So you would have heard Aidan talking about a 37 million pressure at the beginning of the budget setting round process, which has been decreased. Part of that was around making sure that we could cover off any pressures that were absorbable within the budget pressures as we go forward, which we have done, and that's part of those pressures you would have saw in our presentation. But happy to do that as part of the detail in the slides going out.
Is that okay, Councillor Legg?
Thank you very much. Yes, very helpful. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Then I've got no other questions unless anybody speaks now on this part of our budget workshop. Okay, sorry, I'm just reading stuff in the chat bar, which is just about people's personal commitments. Right, thank you very much for the presenters on this part. If I can move to the next part, could I have, I think Sam for the next part, that is Sam Crowe, who's the Director of Public Health. No, I think I think Andrew was expected to come next.
No, excuse me, Jill, you've got Maria. Remember, Maria asked a question earlier on, and I think it is pertaining as well as to children's services, but to adult services as well.
Okay, if you can just excuse me for a moment, Andrew. Fiona, could I ask you to read out Maria's question? Or Maria, are you still here?
Yes, I'm still here.
Sorry, I do apologise. Yours was a question put in advance that I said I would take in this slot. And I'm just hoping that our officers are still present, and I do apologise to you. Could you please read out your question?
I can. I think it might come under children's more, actually.
Teresa's nodding.
Okay. Shall we pick it up under children's then? Okay, right. Thank you very much. I'll pick it up in a minute then. Okay, could I go to Andrew Billany next then, please? Okay, and I do apologise for that mix-up. Thank you very much, Andrew. If you'd like to give your presentation on housing, that would be excellent.
Thank you very much, and thanks everybody. My name's Andrew Billany. I'm the Corporate Director for Housing and Community Safety. So this is a short presentation of the points around those two topics. Excuse me. So just to briefly, housing and the current position here. We are by and large an enabling housing authority, so that a lot of the work that we do is done through others, so particularly through the work of developing new social housing through housing associations, for example. But we are still an important component part of the council and operate a function and a budget and a team. So, but at the moment we're run as a relatively small function within that council. So the overall revenue budget is around £3.5 million, with most of that focus being around statutory responsibilities relating to homelessness, housing needs, so the housing register and housing standards. So things like when there's poor standards within the private rented sector, we have a team who enforce and deal with those kind of issues. So most any members on the call and also in the public will note that there's a strong aspiration and intention laid out in the council's corporate plan to be bold and ambitious as a housing authority, and it's one of the 5 key planks of the corporate plan indeed that we should be such a thing. So able to use our influence position as well as our services to enable and facilitate housing solutions across the board. Much of our, given this is a budget meeting, much of our funding has been reliant on short-term government grants, common issue across the council, but we are funded in such a way, and there's a relatively small draw on the council's general fund. Our focus on homelessness and acute housing need and housing pressure, as important as that is, means there's been less emphasis on what we can do to tackle wider need and wider shortcomings within the housing market. For example, getting first foot on the ladder, access to private rented sector, etc. So that the challenges facing average and low income people when they need to find somewhere to rent or buy. Next slide, please. Thank you. Also importantly, this Scrutiny Committee has looked a lot at community safety areas of work. We lead the Community Safety Partnership for the Dorset Council area, and Councillor Graham Carr-Jones is the chair of that partnership. So we do hold important leadership responsibility for huge areas of importance, critically important areas such as domestic abuse, violent crime, homicide, antisocial behaviour, modern slavery, and the PREVENT programme, preventing terrorist related activity. So our part of the budget is around making sure we hold that partnership together and lead effectively. There are several operational services which sit in the Place Directorate to actually go out and deal with some of these issues on first hand, and we also commission voluntary sector and charity sector organisations to do much of this work. So we are relatively low cost, very low cost actually. Currently that function costs 195,000 a year, and we're developing plans with the considerable help of public health. Colleague Sam going to come up in a minute around looking at plans to invest further in the new duties that we have as an authority. We recognise also that a small investment in this area can deliver multiple savings. We have evidence to show that across the council and partner services. And Councillor Carr-Jones, if he's still on the call, has many examples of where a single case of domestic abuse, for example, is obviously the biggest issue is the huge personal impact on that person or people, but the cost of that is huge as well. So saving people from those situations saves money, to be blunt. So Dorset is a relatively safe area, but we also need to understand the costs and benefits that come about by investing in keeping it so, and then tackling the problems as they exist or arise, where there are individual instances of say violence or domestic abuse. And I give that example. I've mentioned domestic abuse in the last year. Partly, seems to be a common trend of concern around COVID and lockdown, living arrangements. Domestic abuse incidents have risen by 1,000, literally just over 1,000 in the past year. So there's a very strong focus in our work, but also in the implementation of the new Domestic Abuse Act. Next slide, please. I'll race through the next few slides because I'm conscious of time, but housing, the case for investing in housing is something we've worked through with through the Budget Cafe discussions with members and involvement of cabinet members through the meeting a couple of weeks, 10 days ago, the leadership performance meeting. And this is moving that conversation forward and more openly around supporting the principle of establishing our strength as a housing authority and investing in that. There is a savings element to this. If we invest well in activity which prevents homelessness, finds affordable homes, alternative homes at an affordable price, address need beyond those statutory requirements, and enable the development of the right kind of new housing. So this is a link across adults, for example, but also children's social care services. If we develop the right kind of housing that perhaps may be adapted for disabled people or able to accommodate foster families, for example, then that saves money as well as provides positive solutions. To pick out probably our headline when I discuss our performance within members' meetings, probably the headline area is around our need to use temporary bed and breakfast accommodation for homeless people. We currently got 95 households, mainly single people, but not entirely, in bed and breakfast accommodation. We will always need to have access. Say if somebody presents to us as homeless at 5 o'clock on a Friday, we will always need to use this accommodation occasionally, but I'll be entirely honest, 95 households in bed and breakfast is 95 too many. So our plan is to get out of that form of accommodation even as a medium-term solution. It's also expensive. The net cost of bed and breakfast is around £12,000 per year for each placement. because it's expensive and we can only recover so much from housing benefit. And if you take the public purse argument into account, it's far more than the £12,000 a year. So we prevent 10 people from being homeless or enable 10 additional new homes to be built, we save 120,000. Or we get out of B&B altogether, we save more than £1 million. So that's our long-term planning is very much based on that reality of there's a cost benefit, but also as well as the human benefit for going down that line. Next slide, please. So doing more, and I've touched on this slightly, is there is potential to do more to tackle need in other areas of council concern. So settled homes for young people leaving care, foster families, vulnerable single people across the piece, particularly around, and it's a feature of the adults social care white paper that the government have published this week. There's lots of emphasis on the need to provide support for adults across the piece as well as children to make sure people get settled homes and can thrive in their own, even if they have care and support needs. Excuse me. So at present, we rely on what's provided through local housing associations, through the housing register, and we do have large, developing, strong housing associations in our county, so they do provide a lot for our people in need, but there still is a shortfall and a mismatch between housing demand and supply. So we do have, we run a system which allocates or lets homes to people who are high on the registered priority list, but those are a little bit further down. You have to wait. So that's a reality of most local, pretty much all local authorities across the country, but it's a reality of how we're always looking to do more. So investment in increasing the supply of available homes, we work very strongly with housing associations and Homes England on getting more from social housing, but there's also the drive to get more access or better access to the private sector, private rented sector, to do that, and also use our own assets where we can to look at whether that's a better use of our land, so we can provide solutions which save on those costs, which I've touched on. Next, please. So we have a plan which we're working up, and we expect to be taken forward through this cycle. It's a 5-year plan to invest. It's an invest safe strategy which invests in work around preventing homelessness in the first place, finding better value alternative accommodation, and developing a new housing strategy, which isn't just a nicely written document which sits on a shelf. It's something which actually makes a difference to getting a developer or a housing association or an organisation to come to the county or to deliver the solutions for us. So some of it is investing in our own people, but a large chunk of what we're proposing to do is to invest in commissioning or enabling others to provide those kind of housing solutions. I mentioned the adult social care white paper. Expect some of this to be done through a very good voluntary and provider sector in the supported housing world, to make sure we get, when we let somebody a property, they're supported to keep that property, maintain the tenancy, pay the rent, live well. Some of that needs to be supported through support, if that makes sense. So coming through into that 22-23 budget cycle, and that's part of the reason for bringing this here today. Next slide, please. Frozen. Is there a next?
I think we're struggling
on this slide. There's a couple more slides.
I think we're frozen.
We're frozen. I'll tell you what, I'll just carry on talking to the remainder, if you bear with me.
Oh.
What's that? Okay.
Andrew, would you like me to take over presenting?
I don't know. I'll carry on talking I've only got 2 more slides. I'll read to them without you seeing them. So what we're looking to get out today, and Scrutiny Committee has looked at some of these things already, is to consider the plan, which is around over here. Here we are. Next slide after that, please. Great. Okay, so we're looking to enhance the service, I'll be frank, at relatively small cost to deliver better homelessness prevention, better value accommodation and support into settled accommodation. One thing, just to give you some detail of this briefly, we get government grants, short-term grants such as Rough Sleeper Initiative grants. We do believe that that should be targeted better into those organisations like the Lantern, Julian House, Shelter, the national organisation, do great work, and we want to invest more in that type of activity to keep people off the streets and not turning back up at our front door. So the new approach also is to support the ability to link those strategic and commissioning priorities into delivery of new homes and services. So we do get better use of our capital investment as well. Probably another topic for another day, but that's certainly that the way we allocate our capital resources is also a key component of how we use our revenue spend wisely. So I think I've said the rest on there, so could I have the last slide and I'll finish, because I'm ending on community safety, important as that is. I know it's close to the hearts of several members on this call. We are looking to develop our community safety strategy to be forward-looking and not reactive to immediate pressures. So it's something that will meet all our statutory obligations. So the list that I've already outlined, it's evident that in order to maintain Dorset as a place that the Police and Crime Commissioner talks about on his when he was elected, about keeping Dorset safe, seems to be a sensible thing to do. So, but it means we need to focus on these areas. So making sure that we support that a strong and ambitious set of strategies to make sure we deliver. That's my presentation. To answer questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew. And can I go first of all? Are there any non-committee members who would like to comment? Councillor Took, would you like to come in, please?
Thank you, Chair. I was excellent presentation, and I was very heartened by the way that you're looking to expand what you do. In the 5-year plan, is there any room for council housing? So we build houses and we have them and we rent them to people as used to happen. So we have proper council housing, which can be at an affordable rent and which will encourage a lot of people to actually get off the street into a council house, hopefully.
Thank you. I mean, our current approach is very much, as I say, we've set up to be a strong enabling authority, and it is true to say that the Homes England investment programme in affordable housing, including some social rented housing, has 8 of the registered provider partners operating in Dorset, and all of the main ones, the Magnus, Seville, Sovereign, Astor, are on that list. So there's a lot of our approach is to drive more from that programme. Generally, is to get them. They've got the expertise, they've got the money, they've got the private finance to make sure we can deliver more housing, more affordable housing through them. That's our policy position so far. At the moment, we are a registered provider since last year, so we already do have some, in a very small way, what you could describe as council housing. Through the Rough Sleeper accommodation programme, we've acquired properties which we manage as a council, small numbers. So I think there will occasionally be a place for the council to do it for themselves. But our approach so far, and continuing, is to work as hard as we can as that enabling authority with the housing associations, get them to build more, get them to do it in the right places, designed in the right way, and that's the position that we are in. So we never say never, but that's a sense of as being generally a non-stock owning authority with strong developing housing associations. That's the focus of our work.
Okay, I've got Councillor Carr-Jones has asked to come in. Is this on the same subject? Graham? Council Housing?
Yes, sorry, Chair. I'm diving between this and trying to have a conversation with the police. No, I think Andrew's answered that question quite well. I mean, it's about the numbers and the financial side that our RPs can bring to us is so much stronger than we could ever imagine, really, that to get in that position. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor Tuke, or do you have any supplementaries?
It answers it to an extent. I think I would prefer an approach where the council could actually build and develop its own housing, and I think that could be an income stream as well as a cost. So I think we can get rental revenue coming in, but I see that there is very little appetite to go with that, so I'll leave it for the moment. Thank you.
Come back, Chair.
Thank you.
Very brief come back. It's Graham.
Sorry.
Graham, Jill.
Graham, yes, please come back.
I just wanted to answer on talk to that question from Councillor Tuke in terms of, you know, if we're thinking that 4 houses costs roughly £1 million to build and then manage, you'll see when people like Sovereign are investing 28 million in one site in Verwood and the same sort of numbers elsewhere all across the piece, we'd have to seriously get some debt to compete with them. And why I can't see why, as a council, when what we do is as an enabling council is work with those RPs, work together. They've got a share of, what is it, 5-point-something billion. I don't think we're really going to be players in that market. Thanks, Chair.
Could I bring Councillor Gray in on this issue as well, please?
Back once again. Yes, on the same subject, Graham and Andrew. I think from my perspective, just building on Councillor Tuke's point about council houses, I don't think that we're talking about replacing RPs. And I do take Graham's point about capital investment, but clearly the system of RPs isn't covering everybody. Otherwise, we wouldn't have 100 people in bed and breakfast, because there are areas, particularly in social housing, where RPs don't want to go or choose not to go, despite the fact that they've got millions of pounds in the bank ready for investment. What I think maybe the council should look at is supplementing RP providers with those areas, those very small niche areas that provide social housing for some of the areas that they don't provide for. And there are plenty of councils around the country that are doing this. So Dorset's only following what is custom and practice for many other councils. And to answer Graham's point about the capital investment required, this council has got very deep reserves, particularly assets, and we've already seen some of the reserves. So I don't think we would need to go borrowing. I think in a small way, I think Councillor Tuke is asking whether we would like to play in this area. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We haven't got a budget line in for this at the moment, but I think it is something, an open conversation that needs to carry on into the future, because I think there are differing opinions across the council on this, and it would be really useful to have some sort of forum that we can seriously discuss the need for housing and whether we can do this within the council. If I can leave that one with you, Graham, to instigate, and I can see Andrew diving to get in as well. So would one of you just like to comment on that proposal?
Yeah, I think I think I saw Graham nodding. I think we can do as you suggest, Jill. It's more what I can offer as the officer, though. I think it's about as identifying what the need is in the first place. So that what Councillor Gray has said is a fair one. If there's a particular need in a village or a particular area which isn't being met, it's about how we grapple with that and make sure we've got, you know, the best solution for that need in a particular way. So we've answered the broadest thrust is to get the RPs to do it, but if there's a gap, then that's the way we'd expect to build this up. How do we meet that need? And the recent work to revamp the housing register and the new allocations policy is giving us really good evidence and information on that. So that's the way we build this up. I'm more than happy to open up that conversation later.
Okay, so thank you very much. If we can come back on the budget, are there any other budget questions from non-members at the moment? Could I go on to committee members? Councillor Rennie.
Thank you. It's a point when Graham was talking about funding and community safety and grants. I just a point really. I know I was jumping up and down and shouting from the rooftop, as was many people, when we had what seemed a huge amount of money for domestic abuse. But I think we have to always remember as councillors that these grants and these huge pots of money, seemingly huge pots of money, always come with a lot of constrictions. So it may look good within the budget that we've had it, but we often end up having to find innovative ways to use it within the constrictions that it's being given to us. Maybe not given for exactly what we need it at that time, and sometimes given to provide services we're already providing. So it's really a budget comment as a question.
Yeah, and I think I could add to that comment, because there's also a budget line in there where we've had posts that have previously been grant funded that have now had to move into base.
Yes.
And basically, you know, sort of longer term, how sustainable is all this? I don't know whether any officer wants to comment or whether they're happy to just take that as a comment to take on board.
I think we just noted it as a comment. I mean, I think it's I just would comment on this. I think it's just you have to develop that skill as a council officer nowadays. It's making sure we're making best use of those grants with all the constraints. I think there are sometimes ways to do that, particularly domestic abuse. New burdens funding has many constraints which we have to work with, but I try to stay positive about some of that. It's about making sure we use that grant to the best effect.
I applaud you for that as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any more questions on housing? I haven't got any more in the chat bar, so if I could now go on to, if I could thank you, Andrew and Graham,
Pleasure.
for this part of the presentation, and if I could now go on to Sam Crowe, please, for the presentation on public health. Good afternoon, Sam, and sorry to keep you waiting.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen and I'll just bring a few slides up. You bear with me a second. Hopefully this should be coming up. Okay, can you see the first slide?
Yes, yeah, we can see that now. Yep.
Okay, that's brilliant. So I've only got 4 slides today to show you, and the purpose of this is really just to provide members with a bit more detail on the public health grant. I just make the point that most of the grant is invested in mandated public health services, but I thought it'd be helpful to explain a little bit about exactly what those services are today. But I'm also then going to focus on providing a bit of understanding about the wider outcomes that those services can support. And I'd just also make the point that the figures that I'm going to use today are from our 21-22 budget. We're still awaiting the settlement for 22-23. The public health grant doesn't tend to move around very much. It tends to be fairly stable. We're likely to see a small real terms increase, but largely the point of the settlement was to maintain the current investment in the public health grant. In terms of pressures on our budget, most of our services are not demand led. We have some small areas where we do experience some fluctuations in demand, but largely They are capped by the contract values that we have put through the tender process. Obviously, over the past couple of years, we have had some cost pressures due to COVID. Largely, those have been met through separate funding, which has been provided on a non-recurrent basis in the form of what's called the Contain Outbreak Management Fund, provided by government. So I'm not going to cover that today. That's separate non-recurrent funding that we've received specifically for the COVID response. So, as I've said, the two figures I'm really going to hone in on today are circled in red on this slide, and that's the slightly over 1 million that is invested in wider Dorset Council services from the Public Health Grant, and the 13 million or so that is paid into the shared service to pay for the public health services that I'm going to go through in a minute. It's important to realise that we are a shared service and we receive in total 25 million from both of the councils, and that's against an overall combined total for the public health grant of 34 million. The second table here just shows you how that is split out. It's important to realise that the figures that are shown in those columns are the combined service cost across both councils. So what I'll do in the subsequent slides is to split out the Dorset Council's share of that, and I'll show you exactly how the Dorset Council proportion of the public health grant is used to deliver our main public health services, and then more importantly go on to talk about who they support and what's the potential for improving things like healthy life expectancy and some of the early intervention and prevention measures that we're interested in supporting for our residents and communities. So the 13 million or so that comes to the public health service via Dorset Council is broadly split over, I would say, 4 important areas. The first one is what we call clinical treatment services, and that encompasses sexual health services and drug and alcohol treatment. So the Dorset Council share of this together is just short of 6 million. And the types of things that the service do are obviously prompt identification and treatment of people who present with sexually transmitted diseases, but they have over the past few years moved increasingly to a prevention model. So if we were looking at this service 6 or 7 years ago, it was largely focused around our acute trusts where people would present to the service as an outpatient. That has been completely transformed over the past few years, and they're now fully integrated in the community with consultants working outside of the hospitals, and they've moved to a much more prevention-oriented model. So some of the prevention work is done online. There are new digital services that can see people more effectively and more efficiently. Things like chlamydia screening are now provided almost entirely digitally. And they also do a number of outreach services working with other organisations to improve the prevention of sexual health conditions, make sure that people understand what contributes to good sexual health, and increasingly work with some of the most important schools. So the focus of the service has shifted much more towards a community prevention model, which is where we think the investment needs to be. Second portion of that is drug and alcohol treatment. We have a single contract with a provider called Reach, which is about 2.5 million for the Dorset Council area, and they provide treatment services for people with substance misuse issues, and that includes an element for children and young people. The next large area of investment is in what's called early intervention, 0 to 19. In fact, this is now called the Children and Young People's Public Health Service, and it's an integrated service provided by Dorset Healthcare that covers health visiting. So this is visits to families, particularly focusing on the 0 to 5 year period, and then the school nursing service, increasingly focusing on working more strategically in schools on issues like effective education, understanding how to support the curriculum with improving health and wellbeing in schools, but they also do provide some clinics. The next line is the investment in health improvement services. So the Dorset Council shares slightly under 1 million here. The bulk of that is invested in a direct in-house provider called Live Well Dorset. They provide a behaviour change based service, largely telephone and digital coaching. And this is for people who wish to quit smoking, lose weight, tackle low-level alcohol issues, and increase their physical activity. The other element of that is investment in a mandated service called the NHS Health Check programme. That's currently paused partly because of COVID, but also partly because it was trailed in a recent white paper that it's subject to national review. So the government wants to change that service, which was previously focused on providing checks to working age adults at risk of cardiovascular disease. They're looking to expand that, and they've got a review which has literally just been published looking at how it can be provided on a digital basis, but also provide a better pathway for referral into some of those other health behaviour change services, such as Live Well Dorset. And then finally, the other main element of cost within our budget is the Dorset Council's share that pays for the public health team. So it's about 1.2 million, and the public health team increasingly provides advice on commissioning, advice and guidance to our NHS partners as part of the mandation of public health services. A lot of our team have been heavily involved in providing advice on the COVID-19 response over the past couple of years, but we also provide health programme advisors that support each of our localities. They work alongside primary care networks and other community organisations on a variety of public health programmes. And increasingly, I think the value of the team is in supporting the development of programmes like Prevention at Scale and the Health Inequalities Programme, which are delivered through the Integrated Care System and our partners. We also have people within the public health team that work on providing surveillance and public health intelligence, really important to support our decision making and development of strategy in the system, and communications work. So just in terms of how some of those services support some of the wider outcomes, if you think about sexual health service, there are some key outcomes from having better sexual health. This is a source of huge inequality. If you think of the way that diseases like HIV affected parts of our population in the past, making sure that we've got early diagnosis and prompt treatment is really, really important to maintain health in these groups. But also, if you think about younger people, the importance of good sexual health plays a key role in making sure that people don't lose time from their education. And the focus on delayed pregnancy, for example, which used to be called reducing teenage pregnancy, for example, really, really important to make sure that our young people get off to the best possible start in life. In terms of substance misuse, very, very good evidence showing that investment in treatment services has a range of impacts on outcomes that are important to communities. Reduction in crime and improvement in community safety measures has been well documented by many studies. But increasingly, government is looking to target substance misuse treatment on some key groups that often find it difficult to access treatment. So there's new money that has been coming into our local system to make sure that we can provide support for substance misuse to people who may be rough sleeping or in temporary housing. And that improvement of pathways into better housing and employment is a key feature of the substance misuse service now. It also contributes to reducing safeguarding issues and inequality. In terms of the early intervention service, this is probably one of our areas where we have a biggest impact on the population. So the health visitors try to visit every single family that has a new baby within 90 days. Those checks are important for a number of reasons. It can give you insight into what's happening inside the home. But also, over the past few years, we've set a number of outcomes for the service in terms of the way that we would like health visitors to work with families on issues like smoking, mental health and physical activity, all with the goal of really improving those early healthy habits and trying to contribute to healthy life expectancy. In our health improvement service, we have a number of people who directly benefit from the advice that's given through organisations like Live Well Dorset. But I was going to make the point this morning that increasingly we're looking at trying to tackle issues like smoking through different settings. So the prevalence of smoking in the population has fallen, and in the Dorset Council area it's around about 12 to 15%. It does vary in communities, but if you look at some of the people that are admitted to hospital or require domiciliary care or nursing care, quite often they may be requiring that care as a direct result of smoking related disease. So if you look at some of the national economic studies that have been done by Action for Smoking on Health, I've highlighted in yellow there the estimate of cost paid by Dorset Council in adult social care services as a result of people requiring care and support because of smoking related illness. So one of the things that we're increasingly thinking about is how to work more closely alongside other directorates and to try to reach people who may be smoking well in advance of the time that they may be approaching the council for an assessment for care and support needs. And then finally, the public health team, I'd say that some of the outcomes that we contribute to are really through our influence working alongside other organisations in the system. So we've been working over the past few years on a programme called Prevention at Scale, which is really about getting some of our large system organisations like acute trusts, community providers and primary care networks to think about working in a more prevention oriented way. And through that programme, we've trained a huge number of people to become more confident about asking around issues that could be contributing to their risk of diseases like diabetes and cardiovascular disease, and starting to try to move away from a medical model that just looks at treating the symptoms to one that can provide support at an earlier stage to actually help people change those behaviours. My final slide is just to acknowledge the way that we use the public health grant outside of the shared service. So within Dorset Council, we've now built up an investment of slightly over £1 million in 21-22. Some of that is invested in the additional responsibilities that have come to the community safety team. We also invest in some of the community development work that is done across our communities and neighbourhoods. And we've also placed some money with children's services to look at improving early intervention, particularly working around teenage pregnancy and some of the work that's offered through the Home Start programme. And then finally, we've also put across a saving of around 500,000 from the Public Health Service for use within adult social care. So in 21-22, we're still working through the detail of that, but the current ideas are that we will use that to work around the homelessness agenda and to look at improving some of the work on housing for people with complex needs. Full detail still to be decided. So that's all I wanted to say today, Councillor. I'll just come off presenting. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, that is really good. Thank you very much, Sam. Have I got any questions? I've got nothing in the chat bar at the moment. Have I got any questions from non-committee members, please? I haven't got anything in the chat bar at the moment. If I can go on to committee members, please. Oh, I have got an RTS come in from Councillor Took. Would you like to put your question, please?
Very briefly, I thought it was an excellent presentation, Sam. I notice in there that there's some lines that talk about physical health for people and how that is really a good thing for people for their mental health, for their physical health. And this may be more appropriate to place, but it strikes me that in order to encourage that, we should be spending perhaps a little bit more than we currently do on the leisure centres that we run across the county, and we should be encouraging people to go to those leisure centres and improve facilities there so that they feel able to. Is that something that you would support, or?
So it's a good question. I think just looking at the public health approach to that, it's not something that's widely supported by the evidence. So one of the things that the public health team tries to look for is investments that have an impact on the whole population. And although lots of people enjoy some of the services that they receive from leisure centres, to enable that provision for everyone in the population would have financial consequences. So just looking at the public health budget, a number of years ago, we looked at the evidence base from NICE very, very carefully. We used to invest in what I call end interventions to support people who wanted to be more physically active. But we took the decision after reviewing the evidence that actually the money would be better spent investing in things like a behaviour change service. So the reason I say that is because if you look at non-complicated physical activity, and I'm not talking about elite sport or any of the hobbies that people may have, things like walking and cycling are accessible, they're fairly easy to do. It doesn't cost anyone to go for a walk if you've got access to sort of decent green space. So our focus in the past few years has been working with partners to make sure that we understand how to best provide easy access to high quality green space for all of our neighbourhoods across Dorset Council and also BCP Council, and to also think about how we can encourage people to build activity into their daily life. So before COVID, people would often commute to work. Our public health advice would be try, if you can, to use an active travel method to build physical activity into the things that you do every day. So on a population level, that's what the evidence suggests is where we should be putting our money. So I'll sort of perhaps leave that as a separate issue aside from whether we should be investing more in leisure centres.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll leave that there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Have we got any questions from the committee now? I've got one myself, which is around, do you provide antenatal services? And it just comes back from my 40-year-old experiences, because you also commented that a health visitor will visit within 90 days. When I produced babies many years ago, we had 6-8 weeks worth of antenatal courses, and then the midwife or the health visitor usually was there within a couple of days of you coming home. And I just wonder whether we've got any services like that now.
So we don't provide antenatal services, that's provided by the midwifery service, but our health visitors do work very, very closely with midwifery, and there are a number of ways that they work in partnership, but it's not a responsibility that's provided by the Children and Young People's Public Health Service. Okay, thank you. I've got no other RTS in the chat bar at the moment, so if I can say thank you very much, Sam, for your presentation and for the questions. And if I can now move on to the last part of our meeting, which is around children's services. Can I ask, is Teresa there? Hi, hi Teresa. Sorry to keep you waiting. I really appreciate you hanging around for this. If I can hand over to you for your presentation, please, that would be really useful. Thank you very much.
Lovely, thank you. I'm just going to hopefully share some slides and get those to come through. Let's try again.
And please don't let me forget Maria's question.
Now I'll come to that at the relevant point, if that's okay, Councillor Rowe, because we do have a response for you for that, obviously.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So hopefully colleagues can see that, and I won't take too long because I know people will have been very patiently waiting this morning. So just a very quick run through around what it is we do, just to remind colleagues. We've been transforming our services for the past 18 months. We've seen some real improvement in our vacancy rates across social work and management caseloads, and we've now got some really strong integrated work at a local level. As a Children's Services Department, we work with 5,000 children every year in various stages of need, so everything from electively home educated children, children with SEND needs, children in need, children in child protection need, and children in care. We know that there's been a significant investment in our SEND sufficiency, so the capital investment in particular, to make sure that we have the right number of places to keep our children in schools, firstly mainstream locally, and then where they need specialist provision, that specialist provision too to be much more local. So we're seeing that beginning to deliver, obviously delayed by many of the building pieces, and that's probably been my biggest frustration this year. Not in anything that any of us have been able to control, but some real challenges around getting those schools and getting that care provision open. However, the point in which we were just literally concluding our Ofsted, we also went into a further transformation bid because our plan had always been to bring forward a 5-year plan for children's services. I've always felt that's possible, and we're hoping that even in the face of a pandemic and a number of other recent events, that we can continue to deliver on that 5-year plan. So that's all about making Dorset the best place to be a child, best place to thrive, and that's about further integration, co-location with partners, deepening those community relationships. We're well on that way, and we've got a really strong children, young people and families plan where that's all really heavily described. Most importantly, in any children's services, what you're looking for really is a managed system, and Ofsted have proved that we have that. So our data seems to suggest that more families are getting help at the right time. and that's even in absolute evidence of, you know, an increasing requirement of need. And there's no doubt about that. But in that space, we've been able to support families sooner so that needs don't escalate and risks don't escalate. And that's led to less children coming into our care. And so we've seen a steady falling over the past 18 months. And those figures are still roughly around the 440 figure today. And as you all know, much of what we spend in children's services is on care, and therefore it's very important that we manage that spend, but that we manage that spend through making sure that only the right children come into care and do so in a planned way. Ofsted looked at that in great detail, as they do within that 3-week inspection, and validated that was absolutely in the right space. We cannot project the same decrease this year. We know that we've got the levels down to the right level in terms of those coming in, and we can broadly, the death of Arthur and other things exempted from that, we can broadly anticipate the numbers that we know will be coming into our care. And the way in which and why we can anticipate that is because we should see children generally come through a process of being on a child protection plan, being in pre-proceedings before we go into the court arena, and then going into the court arena. So most children should come into our care in a planned way. There shouldn't be surprises and there shouldn't be emergencies or children that we didn't know about. Now, sometimes there are, of course, children come into our county that we don't know previously and suddenly their needs are very severe. We identify that quickly and those children move through the system without going step by step. Sometimes family situations change dramatically and suddenly, and therefore the children need to do that. And obviously we take every single personal and personalised situation. And sometimes, you know, particularly maybe where we have a much larger family, those ambitions can be more challenging to our system and more challenging to our budget. But our proposal has been to get new provision open. I was very pleased to go to Dorchester Road this week, and both the new build and the existing conversion of the original house just coming along brilliantly. Really delighted with that progress. It's a bit slower than we wanted. We had hoped to be open by now, but you members will be delighted with the provision that we're providing for those vulnerable young people once we can get that open in the spring. And we're always looking at other opportunities to be able to make sure that we can, some ways, disrupt the care market, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. And we've been able to do that in recent months and look to doing that next year. So a quick run through of what our revenue budget was. We did, as has been discussed previously, zero budget build this with our blueprint for change. So we went all across every team and every team was rebuilt. And so we know exactly where and how we allocated those resources, and that was wholly in line with need. So we've seen some small but significant pressures this year, which we continue to attempt to manage down, but those pressures really largely are in two spaces, which is the placement spend and the loss of trading with schools. So very understandable, very frustrating for us, because we think if we hadn't had the continued pandemic issues, we obviously would have been able to balance the budget this year, which would have been very positive for us. But we'll continue to work with that as we go. But the placements is the biggest issue. And I want to just talk through that a little bit, if I might, because what we're seeing is that it's that external spend, spending money into provision that is not our own, because we haven't yet got our own open, that is costing us significant amounts of money. I've talked before and presented before on the position, which is any market which is overbalanced into one part or another is a concern. And the Competition and Marketing Agency has talked very clearly in their initial return and report that the presence of private equity in the children's social care market has distorted that market in many ways. And so we're keen, along with central government, and having lots of conversations about how we make sure that there's a better balance in that market. And for us, that balance is about having more provision and more foster carers locally. That step is, the detail you may not be able to read in the slides will be circulated, but that step approach shows the number of beds that we're bringing into the Dorset marketplace, both our own and others. So we're not saying we won't work with external providers, that would be foolish, but we're absolutely saying we want to have a real balance of economy there, and we want to make sure that our own harbour approach, which is looking at doing intensive support to young people, sits alongside developing sufficiency from other providers as well. So good progress being made there, as I say, just slightly stalled by some delays in building programmes. The harbour cost avoidance, so looking at the lives of children, less missing episodes, less admissions to hospital, less fixed term exclusions, so the whole system cost and the whole system saving from the Harbour model, we're already seeing just in its first 6 to 12 months of inception, really significant savings across the system. We will be looking more and more at that and having that evaluated by a partner university too, to make sure that we can bring forward the evidence of that. And if we can see that that's having big system savings and improving children's lives, we may well look to develop that further in future years. Our transformation programme for year 2 and onwards is absolutely in line with where we've already got to. I won't say too much about all of these, but fundamentally they all have the same theme at heart, which is about integration, inclusion and support. So Mockingbird Family Model is a way of delivering fostering in a much more integrated way, in a much more inclusive way. Foster carers basically operating as almost an extended family of foster carers wrapping around each other, providing largely 24/7 support so that we know that we can see less placement breakdown. We know every time a child's placement breaks down, the subsequent cost goes up. So it's a budgetary issue, as well as clearly a life outcomes issue. Holistic safeguarding, working with that whole family, what we know already in terms of managing risk in our community, which we must do and we must do safely, but children's lives will sometimes require us to manage risk with them and their families. And some of that risk comes from things such as we've heard before around domestic abuse, drugs and alcohol and mental health issues. And we need those practitioners to be really working absolutely cheek by jowl with the children's practitioners. Thinking family, acting child will keep us safe and support us to keep more families together where it's safe to do so. We want to deliver that work in really robust family hubs, reviewing our children's centres, making sure that there are places where we can deliver complex work from and families can access all of the services they need quickly. And we're doing that across the whole council. Sometimes families want to access and can access the help they need digitally. We're not having a good enough offer of that at the moment, and we think that if we make a much better offer for digital help. We know, for example, we've already reviewed a lot of the early help requirements that come into our front door, and those are very quick responses in terms of delivering information and advice. But that's a person-focused response at the moment, so we know we could do that probably more efficiently if we could do that digitally. We also know that we want to eradicate the cliff edge at 18 for our children. It's an intolerance for me and it's an intolerance for Vivian and it's an intolerance for many of you members. We want to see children staying within their service requirements for as long as necessary so that they are into that settled adulthood and that settled adulthood is an ambitious one and one where there's lots of opportunities. So we've also brought forward a programme for that and really pleased that we were able to appoint yesterday the independent chair for that piece of work, which I think will give it real capacity and emphasis. So that investment that we brought forward a few months ago and was agreed by Cabinet of 2.6 million over 5 years is delivering a cashable saving of 15 million and a cost avoidance of 12.7. All of the detail of which is here and I can discuss at any point going forward. Fundamentally, most of it is about changing both the numbers and the model of children in care. So having less and where they are, is it home, is in a family, or is in residential care that is local. Some of it is also about looking at the levels of staffing that we have in different areas and thinking about if we can do things different digitally, can we reduce some of the sort of admin tasks that staff are doing that are not totally efficient. I want to come then, if I might, to the tactical savings that sit alongside those savings, and these are things that I think are important for us to pay attention to alongside transformation. It's good business to keep your business tidy. It's good business to make sure that you're only doing things that need to be done by us, and it's good business to make sure that what we're doing is kept efficient and quality. So there are some services that we presently run, which we don't need to run. Others could do, I think, as well as we can. And we can look at delivering those differently. And so on this tactical review spreadsheet here, you can see that we have 2 nurseries. Again, we're not really required to run these nurseries as a local authority. It's early years provision that can be run by other people, and we think other players may be able to do that well. It's not got a cashable saving for us, but it's got a constant overspend for many years that would therefore be avoided. So we're reviewing that and thinking about whether we close or transfer responsibility. Just jump down to the music service, which is in the same sort of zone really, which is we really value our music service. We want our music service to continue to deliver and even go higher and further than they are at the present time, but thinking about the best future governance for that. And it may well be possible that we can reduce the council headcount and therefore have reductions in payroll and associated overheads by having another entity deliver the music service. So we're considering that and reviewing that for future transfer. There's no actual cashable saving there, but it is an overhead of headcount. Efficiency savings across a range of packages of support, most particularly the delivery of children who are disabled strategy, which is going to review provision and services to make sure that the provision that we have is the right level. What families have told us for a long time is they require more overnight respite and they require more short-term breaks. And we firmly believe that if that were the case, we may see less need for permanent long-term foster care if we were able to provide that early support, which is how I view short breaks and overnight respite. So Councillor Rowe, I don't know if this is a good time to read your question, and I know that Claire Shields, Claire, if you're online, has produced a response for you.
Thank you. Support and short breaks are a lifeline to parents and carers of people who have a disability. They are essential to the carers' well-being to enable them to care more efficiently and prevent crisis. In the disabled strategy, which I think we're looking at part of it here, the delivery and lower cost care and support aims to save Dorset Council £1 million through changing the way short breaks are delivered. I've asked for detail behind this, and also I'd like to know how you aim to maintain quality. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Rowe, and I'll just, I have prepared a response, so I'll just read it for you just to cover all the details. So we have been reviewing our service delivery and spend through this financial year for our children who are disabled. What we plan to do is spend our money differently. So like you, we recognise the importance of short breaks provision and the lifeline that provides. So we don't have enough short breaks provision, particularly overnight short breaks, also known as respite for our families. And as a result, some of our children have entered full-time care or full-time education residential placements. And this isn't necessarily what families would have wanted. And it's more expensive to us than providing for short breaks. So an important part of our strategy is to increase the availability of short break support and reduce the need for full-time care. We've benchmarked the costs of our current full-time residential care provision for children with disabilities, and we can see that it's higher than we would expect it to be. So we plan to look at all of our available provision to make sure that we're maximising occupancy levels, offering good value care and supporting the development of new local provision for children with disabilities to increase our supply. We're recruiting more foster carers who are able to provide foster care for children who are disabled, and we recognise that family-based care can deliver better outcomes for children with disabilities, but it's also more cost effective than residential care as well. The availability of in-home support for our families with children with disabilities was greatly affected by the pandemic. And as a result, the cost of those packages were more expensive than they would normally be. So we're working on that, and we're working alongside our adult services colleagues for the new care framework that's coming forward to have more different types of care available for in-home support. And we think this will be more cost effective as well. And our approach to quality is really focusing on individual case planning, co-production with families and carers and young people. And then we have robust performance management of our operational service delivery, but also robust contract management of providers to make sure they're delivering what we've asked them to provide. So hope that answers your question, Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, and Councillor Rowe will send you that written response as well, but thank you for your question. It's absolutely essential, and it's exactly in the same vein as we're reflecting, really, which is that we are looking to make sure that we have a greater range, and therefore we absolutely believe, and it's been evidenced in other parts of our transformation, that having a greater range of service provision actually means that we lower cost in time.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So a small amount of additional money has also gone into the budgets for this year to respond to the demand and the increase in need. I won't go through this whole slide because I'm aware of time, but you'll also see that there is the funding for a new service manager for children who are disabled there. That service manager will allow more market development, more opportunity to be thinking about a range of options for children in terms of care packaging. So we have a children in care model. It is summarised here. It's a much more detailed model than I'm going to go through, but fundamentally just wanted to kind of really bring to members and that sense that what we do know is that we know the likely children coming into our care. We know where they're likely to be placed, and we know that in time we're looking to return more children either to our local space because of more foster carers, or certainly returning them from from residential care that's out of county into residential care that's in county, but we'll always do that in the child's time frame. So you can see that we have that 1 year plan for the financial piece. Sorry, stop there now. I'll stop. Yes, I'll stop there. That 1 year plan is part of a 5-year strategy.
Okay, that is really good. And sorry, I seem to have a bit of an echo. Let me just pull this up. Thank you very much for your presentation. That was really, really useful. Can I just ask, on the care placements, on the short breaks, where does that appear in the budget? Which budget line does that come under? This is where I get quite confused on budgets, that I don't understand some of the details.
So it's a care packages and a residential care budget line, Chair, because it's about the amount that we're spending on residential we would see come down as we see the care packages spend go up. So you would see it in a kind of line by line. You'd see it in the children who are disabled care packages budget, the level of direct payments that are apportioned. We'd be expecting to see potentially go up as we see residential spend come down. And I'm not just talking about our own residential, although I am talking about that. I'm also talking about external residential.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, have I got any questions from non-committee members? At the moment, I haven't got anything in the chat bar, but if you come in quick. Just going to the committee then, I've got Councillor Ireland with a question.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Comment and 2 questions. I'll get the comment out of the way. In Appendix 2, where it's just the budget movements, it might have been clearer.
Sorry, I think we've missed part of that, Councillor Ireland.
And then below that
Could you
says.
Start again.
Yeah, sorry, it's Appendix 2 in the papers. This is my just comment. I think it could have been laid out slightly better because it gives you a opening base budget of £76.5 million. You've got all the numbers below. It ends up with 74.2, and then there's an increase in base. So if you just look at the top and the bottom, you go, what's going on there? What you really needed was a subtotal because the base budget was amended, and then the rest are applied later. So that's just my comment. The question, Councillor Biggs touched on it back at the beginning of the meeting, if we can remember that far back, about numbers of people, the children in care. So you look at the paper and you see in 16.10, and the slides Teresa's just put up, we have a growth, 8 new entrants a month. Yet you look at 16.12 and it says we've got 441, and we'll only have 425. So you think, how does that happen? Because that's not growth. And then you've got 16.17 where it says that nationally numbers of children in care is expected to increase, but because we're not seeing that in Dorset at the moment, we're ignoring it essentially. So I guess my question is, it's going back to Richard Biggs and with the recent events, is 425 a reasonable figure, or a wise figure to pick on? Is it just because it's easy to balance the budget with 425 instead of 441 or 450? Yeah, that's basically my question. And my second question, I'll put it in now just so it can be answered at the same time. The harbour, we have savings predicated on the harbour opening in 2022 in April. If it doesn't open, then what's the consequences?
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Ireland. I'm far from ignoring the impact of Arthur's death. I'm really very mindful about the impact that has, and part of my mindfulness around that is being mindful around how we work with families and ensuring that some of the, as I've said previously, absolutely understandable national grief and anger around Arthur's death doesn't install into our work as a partnership an over intervention into families' lives, because it's just as important that we manage that principle as we manage anything else. So some of the conversations that I've been hearing nationally in the last few weeks about let's dispense with consent for families, I don't subscribe to. I don't think any of us would around our own families. So we need to be really mindful about maintaining that position that we know, and the evidence has told us for many years, that where it's safe to do so, families are the very best place to be with their children. We know that the evidence is that. So we're working ever more on a children's services basis, on a basis of evidence. So not in any way ignoring any new evidence that comes to us, and Arthur's death is part of that for sure. Really paying attention to that, but also holding that really thoughtfully with all of the other evidence that we have. 8 new entrants, yes, that's our estimate from an evidence base of the last 2 years. It's an average. It certainly isn't a target, and it isn't a deadline. We know that as many children as become looked after, we want to see many of those go into permanency and therefore cease being looked after, cease being our children in care. So if children come into our care, our intention is that they get into a permanent family situation as soon as possible. For some, that will be adoption and they'll exit that way and the numbers will come down. For some, that will be a special guardianship order with a family member or somebody else. They'll exit that way and the numbers will come down. For some, it may well be that they go to foster care, they have a long-term relationship with those foster carers, and those foster carers decide to take a special guardianship on them or adoption. They'll exit our care and the numbers will come down. We know, however, for many of our children in Dorset, they have been in our care for many years. They're 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and they will be growing out with us. But some of them grow out at 18 each year. They exit our system and the numbers come down. What we're predicating the model on, which Lee in finance has done a great piece of work on, is that the 8 that come in every month will be just slightly lower than the numbers that go out every month. And therefore we'll see a general gently lowering of the numbers still. That if we saw the numbers that we're predicting, let's go, and I hate going with numbers in this if I'm honest, because these are children and we know we always personalise our plans around them, but let's go with the 415, the 420, something in that region. That would have us much closer to the same sort of numbers as local authorities like us. So it's not an extraordinary space for us to be placing ourselves in, it's about the right space. But we couldn't get there quicker because we had inherited a number of years ago as a new council a very much distorted and expanded number and a base that from Dorset County Council. So I think we've got a really good evidence base, but I don't know, none of us expected the pandemic. I don't know what Arthur's circumstance will change to the system, but what I know is that we must stay sure-footed, calm, managing anxiety and working with our families to get to the best outcome for our children. But thank you for your question. The harbour, yes, goodness me, if it doesn't get finished in the spring of 2022, I'm going to go and finish it myself, Councillor Island. I'm deeply frustrated by any buildings delayed. They're the most frustrating things of all. And in all seriousness, we are constantly looking at other options around how we might be able to find alternative places for our children, because we're desperately keen to get those beds for ourselves ready. And I was just there, as I said, this week, and partly just to keep track of that progress. I think if my building colleagues were on the call, they'd say that we're desperately chasing it down the whole time, but it's not anything that they can do other than the general issue about supply, as we're all aware. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Councillor Ireland. Have you got any other questions, or are you?
No, that's it. It was a very comprehensive
Okay.
answer on the numbers. It makes it more understandable. Thank you.
Okay. Can I just ask committee members, have you got any more questions? I haven't got anything in the RTS at the moment. No. Councillor Rennie is saying she hasn't got questions.
No, there's nobody there.
Okay. I must say I thought that was a really good presentation, and I'm very grateful for it. I would like to say something about Arthur, but I don't quite know what to say because it was just so terrible. But I think we do need to be very mindful of the position that this council could be in, because this could easily have been us as anywhere else, and that is the thing that I find so distressing over it all. As they say there, but for the grace of God. So I'm so glad for the comments that have already been made about Arthur, and I'm not going to say fingers crossed because that is crass, but I just want to say that I hope, I wish safety for all of our people in care, as I know there is already. So thank you for your ongoing work with that. I think we are now finished with children's, and I think this brings this part of the Budget Scrutiny Committee to an end. I am slightly over time. There are no urgent business and there is no exempt business, but I've been asked if Councillor Bartlett can come in now. If I can introduce him, he is the chair of Place and Resources Committee, which is the committee that will stand on the seating down of this committee. If I can go to Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor, and congratulations on a very well chaired meeting with a lot of interest. Thank you for that. Unfortunately, due to the length of time this meeting is overrun, which was an unforeseen consequence, I need to make the following announcement, and it is that as the People in the Health Scrutiny Committee has lasted longer than we expected it to, we will not be able to go ahead with the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee meeting today. Members and officers have already had a full morning and some members are unable to continue this afternoon. I have therefore agreed that the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee will not meet today, and I have asked officers to rearrange the meeting to an alternative date. Notice of the new date will be given as soon as possible. Thank you, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. And as you say, this has been a very long but also a very fruitful meeting. I think it's been a very good meeting. Okay, I'd like to thank everybody who's been on this committee today, and I'd like to thank all of the officers who I have to say have done an astounding job this morning. I've really appreciated the work that you've done, and I'd like to thank all of the members of the public who are out there who have listened to this debate this morning. And with that, I would like to wind this meeting.
Jill, could I just say something as well? I think, Jill, you are to be congratulated in engendering this sense of everybody, non-members especially, who wish to come and have stayed the course and shown enough interest to ask questions. I have never been to a budget briefing stroke meeting that has given us as much information to try to help us make those dreadful decisions that we have to make on behalf of people who are not within council. So thank you, Jill.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your kind words, Councillor Rennie. I think it has been interesting. It's been a very good debate. And with that, I'd like to wind the meeting up and say thank you to everybody. So thank you and goodbye.
Thank you very much.